Before the beginning of time, before earth or sky, there was only the endless deep. Two waters, vast and eternal, gently mingling in silence. One was sweet and fresh, like a hidden spring, and the other was heavy and salt, like the restless sea. In the soft stillness, these waters became known as Apsu and Tiamat. From their union, all things were destined to arise, the gods, the heavens, and the stories that shaped human memory. As you listen, allow yourself to drift with these waters. Imagine yourself floating, carried on calm waves where time has not yet begun. Each ripple is a thought, each current a pathway into forgotten myths. Here, in the cradle of Babylonian creation, you are not asked to solve or strive, only to listen, to breathe, and to let ancient stories carry you towards sleep. The myth is vast, yet its rhythm is gentle. Tonight, you will walk slowly through it, as if guided by lantern light across the waters of eternity. Chapter 1: The Primeval Waters. Apsu and Tiamat in stillness before there were temples, before there were cities, before there were even people to remember. The Babylonians told of a time before time. It was a world without sky, without earth, without light. Nothing had yet been divided, nothing had been given its boundaries. Only water existed, stretching endlessly, without shore or horizon. This water was not one thing, but two, flowing together in a deep, unbroken stillness. On one side was Apsu, the fresh water, clear and quiet, the source of springs and rivers. On the other side was Tiamat, the salt water, heavy and vast, the endless sea. The ancient myth described them not as mere elements, but as eternal beings. Apsu embodied the hidden purity of the abyss, and Tiamat embodied the restless chaos of the ocean. Together, they mingled, neither fully separate nor fully one. From this mingling, there was no storm, no struggle, only a soft, formless potential, a silence that waited. The Babylonians imagined this state as the womb of creation itself, not yet shaped, not yet spoken, but holding within it everything that could ever be. When we speak of beginnings, we often imagine light breaking darkness, or earth rising from water. But here, at the very start of the Babylonian story, the beginning is stillness. It is not the drama of sudden birth, but the quiet pause before breath. In this sense, the myth opens not with movement, but with calm, a picture of existence resting in itself. Scholars tell us that these waters were not only metaphors, but reflections of the geography surrounding Mesopotamia. The people lived between two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, and beyond them stretched the Persian Gulf. Fresh and salt water were not abstractions, they were daily realities, forces both life-giving and overwhelming. For the Babylonians, imagining creation as the mingling of river and sea made sense, for they saw the union of waters wherever they lived, farmed and sailed. Yet, in the myth, these waters are more than natural. Apsu is the abyss beneath the earth, the unseen reservoir that feeds the rivers. He is quiet depth, hidden and sustaining. Tiamat is the ocean, vast and unpredictable, the mother of storms and the devourer of coasts. She is restless breaths, untamed and eternal. Together, they embody two faces of mystery, the hidden and the revealed, the calm and the turbulent. In their union, time itself had not yet begun. There were no days, no nights, no cycles of moon or sun. The Babylonians described this stage as a suspension, where even the gods had not yet come into being. Existence floated in a kind of eternal twilight, not empty, but waiting. Here we can pause and reflect. What does it mean to imagine creation not as a spark, but as a silence? What does it mean that the world begins not in conflict, but in rest? Perhaps the myth speaks to a truth the ancients sensed, that before there can be shape, there must first be before there can be life. There must first be stillness to hold it. Archaeologists who have studied the Babylonian texts note that the story of Apsu and Tiamat was written down on clay tablets, known as the Enuma Elish, meaning when on high, after its opening words. These tablets were copied and recited during rituals, especially at the New Year festival. The people did not treat the myth as mere story. It was a cosmic truth, one to be spoken aloud so that order could continue in the world. In listening to this first part of the myth, we are hearing not only a narrative, but a worldview. The Babylonians lived with the constant risk of floods, storms, and droughts. For them, water was both the giver of crops and the bringer of ruin. To describe the universe as born from water was to describe it as born from both gift and danger, blessing and threat. Apsu and Tiamat embodied this duality. Still, before the conflicts to come, the myth lingers here. In the calm of their mingling, it is almost meditative, as though the storytellers themselves recognize the need to rest before the unfolding of events. In their telling, creation does not rush. It begins as a pause, a long exhale, an endless drifting. The image of mingling waters appears in other traditions too. In Egyptian myth, there is the primeval ocean called Nun, from which the first hill rises. In the Hebrew scriptures, there is the formless deep, over which the spirit moves before creation begins. These parallels remind us that ancient peoples across lands saw the ocean not merely as water, but as the eternal ground from which life itself emerges. And yet, in the Babylonian imagination, there are always two waters. They did not picture creation as arising from a single ocean, but from a union, a mingling of difference. Apsu and Tiamat are not enemies, not yet. They are companions, flowing into each other, forming the first harmony. Perhaps this too reflects a truth that existence itself arises not from sameness, but from the joining of opposites. Think of how fresh rivers meet the sea, how one current presses into another. The water becomes neither fully fresh nor fully salt, but something between. In that brackish space, new life often flourishes. Marshes and estuaries teem with creatures, nourished by the blending. In this way, the myth mirrors nature. Life begins not in the pure and unmixed, but in the mingling of differences. For the Babylonians, the mingling of Apsu and Tiamat was the first moment of fertility. They were parents not yet conscious of their children, resting before the arrival of sound and form. Later, they will become divided, even opposed. But in this first chapter, they are simply waters flowing into one another, eternal and undisturbed. If we listen closely, we may sense why this story was told, not only as explanation, but as comfort. To imagine the cosmos resting in water is to imagine it cradled, held. Apsu and Tiamat are vast, but they are not yet hostile. They are the embrace before the struggle, the quiet before the storm. In this way, the myth mirrors our own experience of rest, that before waking, before effort, we too must float in silence. The clay tablets that preserve this myth are broken in places, their lines cracked by time. Yet even through gaps, the picture of the waters remains vivid. Scholars piece together the fragments like a puzzle, recovering the rhythm of the ancient chants. When read aloud, the language has a cadence, not hurried, not rushed, but slow, as though the words themselves were waves. Apsu, the freshwater abyss. Tiamat, the salt sea. Their names still echo, long after the temples have crumbled. To speak them is to step back into the stillness before time, in the quiet of night. As you listen, you may feel yourself carried into that same stillness. Just as the Babylonians imagined, you drift in waters before creation. Thoughts rise and fall like gentle currents. Breath flows like rivers beneath the surface. And in this state, you too return to the beginning, not of the universe, but of rest. Perhaps this is what the myth offered most, a way to see stillness as sacred, a way to honor the pause, the silence, the unmoving depth. Before the clash of gods, before the making of sky and earth, there was this two waters mingling, two presences, eternal. Nothing else was needed. And so this chapter closes, not with drama, but with calm. The world is not yet born. The gods are not yet awake. The silence is full, waiting, endless. You were invited to rest within it, as though floating in the cradle of the first waters, held gently between creation and nothingness. Chapter 2: Whispers of Firstborn Gods, from the stillness of mingled waters, where Apsu's fresh depths met the boundless salt of Tiamat, the first shapes of divinity began to take form. They did not arrive with thunder or flame, but like ripples breaking upon a mirror-smooth surface. Their names were Lamu and Lahamu, Ansha and Kish. They were not yet the familiar gods of temple hymns and carved idols. Instead, they embodied directions, horizons, and foundations, the faint outlines of a world that was only beginning to breathe. Lamu and Lahamu appeared first. Their names echo across the oldest tablets of the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic. They are spoken of as primordial beings, vast and silent, who marked the first division within the still waters. Scholars often describe them as silt or mud, images drawn from the mingling of river and sea, where new land emerges in slow, steady layers. Yet their role was not only physical. They represented the earliest attempts to separate and define, to bring shape to an otherwise unbroken expanse. Soon after came Ansha and Kisha, the horizon above and the horizon below. Together they suggested the stretch of the universe, the upper arc of the heavens and the lower plane of the earth. They were not yet sky and soil as later myths would imagine them, but the very idea of boundaries, of edges that give orientation to space. Without them, existence would remain a formless sea, without reference or direction. What is striking is that these beings were not born in silence. Their presence disturbed the calm of Apsu and Tiamat. Where before the waters rested in timeless harmony, now there was stirring, movement, and the beginnings of unease. It was as though the first breath of creation could not arrive without also unsettling the balance from which it emerged. The Mesopotamian scribes who preserved these stories seem to recognize a paradox. Creation is never gentle. To bring something into being is to disturb what came before. The ripples that Lamu, Lahamu, Ansha, and Kisha introduced were not violent, yet they were enough to mark a shift. For the first time, the eternal waters felt motion, and with motion came tension. Archaeologists and historians note that these early gods may reflect the ancient Mesopotamian worldview itself, shaped by the land they lived in. Mesopotamia, the land between rivers, was defined by the Tigris and Euphrates. Each year, their floods deposited silt, turning barren soil into fertile ground. Life emerged from the mixing of waters, but always with risk. Floods could both nourish and destroy. To imagine creation as silt-born beings stirring the primordial sea was to reflect on the delicate balance the people themselves knew so well. It is here that one begins to sense the myth as more than story. These firstborn deities were not only cosmic symbols, they were expressions of lived reality, of rivers swelling, of horizons opening, of the earth's foundations shifting beneath human feet, as Lamu and Lahamu stirred, as Ansha and Kisha stretched across the vastness. They carried within them the seeds of conflict, not through battle, not yet, but through the simple truth that their presence introduced difference. Before them, Apsu and Tiamat were one inseparable waters, endlessly mingled. With the rise of the firstborn gods, unity gave way to duality. Boundaries existed, and with boundaries came the possibility of friction. Later, myths would amplify this friction into struggle, even war among the gods. But here, in these earliest stirrings, one finds only whispers, the quiet awareness that from harmony must come disturbance. From stillness must come movement. Some scholars have wondered whether these firstborn deities were ever worshipped in their own right. Unlike Marduk, the hero god of Babylon, or Enlil, the lord of air and authority, Lamu, Lahamu, Ansha, and Kisha left few traces in temple prayers or daily rituals. They seemed to belong entirely to mythic time, to the distant past before the world was ordered. Yet their absence from ritual does not lessen their importance. Their names preserved the memory of beginnings, the fragile moment when eternity cracked open to let creation through. When the Babylonians told and retold these stories, they may have asked themselves, what does it mean that the first children of the waters were not gods of light, or fire, or human form, but horizons and foundations? Perhaps it suggests that before anything could be created, there had to be direction. Before mountains or rivers, before sun or stars, there had to be the possibility of above and below, of here and there. If you pause and think of it, the same is true in your own life. Before you can move forward, there must be a sense of horizon, a sense of ground beneath you. Without it, there is only formless drifting, an endless sea of possibility with no path through it. In this way, the myth does not speak only of gods, but of the human need for orientation. The disturbance these gods brought is equally telling. Movement within the waters was both necessary and dangerous. It opened the way for life, yet it also provoked the first tensions between Apsu, the quiet abyss, and Tiamat, the boundless chaos. The whisper of conflict had entered the story, though it would take time to grow into open struggle. Imagine, for a moment, those ancient listeners in Babylon or your seated as the priestly voice recited the Enuma Elish. They would have heard the names of these primordial deities, strange and remote, and felt the echo of something older than temples, older than kings. They were hearing not just about gods, but about the very fabric of existence, the first distinctions, the first stirring, the first movement from silence into sound. The myth carries an unspoken truth. Every creation disturbs. To build a city, the land must be altered. To write a tablet, clay must be pressed and marked. To begin anything, the calm of what was before must give way. This, perhaps, was why the ancients imagined the firstborn gods not as triumphs of order, but as whispers of unease. And so, the story rests at this point of delicate balance. Apsu and Tiamat still reign, yet they are no longer alone. Their children stir the waters. The calm is no longer complete. Something has begun, though it does not yet have form or voice. As the myth unfolds, one may sense the fragility of that moment, the thin line between harmony and disruption, between silence and sound. It is a reminder that creation is never without consequence. The first horizons were drawn, the first foundations stirred, and with them came the first questions in the stillness after their emergence. One might wonder, when something new is born, is it a gift or is it an intrusion? Is movement always progress, or is it also the beginning of conflict? Perhaps the firstborn gods do not answer. They only remind us that to be alive, to create, to become, is to ripple the waters of what was once still. Chapter 3. The growing generations of divinity. From the quiet ripples stirred by the firstborn gods, new beings began to rise. The stillness of Apsu and Tiamat, once unbroken, now gave way to a rhythm of births, each generation unfolding like waves against a shore. The divine family expanded, and with it came both wonder and disturbance. Among these children of the waters appeared Anu, the sky, his very being stretched upward, lifting the cosmos toward light and air. Anu represented height, vastness, and the open expanse above. He was not yet the sun nor the stars, but the pure possibility of space beyond the waters. For the Mesopotamians, who lived under the endless vault of heaven, Anu embodied stability and authority, a distant yet watchful presence that gave order to what was otherwise undefined. Beside him rose Ea, also known as Enki. Ea was tied not to the sky but to the deep, the subterranean waters hidden beneath the earth. He was the god of wisdom, of cleverness, of the subtle movements of knowledge. His character stood in contrast to the boundless chaos of Tiamat. Where she embodied sheer immensity, Ea represented discernment and skill. In time, he would become a figure beloved in Mesopotamian tradition, a god who protected humanity, who used intellect to navigate the dangers of divine conflict. But here, in these earliest births, he was simply one more pulse within the growing rhythm of existence. Each generation of gods layered new principles upon the cosmos. Anu gave height, Ea gave wisdom, and others carried foundations of wind, storm, and fertility. What was once an undisturbed sea became a living family. The divine children filled the silence with sound. Their voices, their movement, their presence unsettled the abyss of Apsu, who had long cherished the calm of still waters. The Enuma Elish describes this tension in words that are simple but powerful. Apsu, the freshwater abyss, became restless. He found no peace in the noise of his offspring. The quiet purity he once embodied was slipping away, replaced by commotion. The young gods laughed, stirred, and clashed. They were not malicious, but their vitality disturbed the deep. This is where the myth turns from serene beginnings to conflict. Creation was not a gentle blossoming, but a struggle between the old and the new. Apsu desired silence, a return to stillness. Yet the younger gods, by their very nature, could not be silent. To exist was to move, to speak, to disrupt. Their growth was both necessary and unsettling. For the Babylonians who listened to these stories, such imagery may have carried more than cosmic meaning. Their own lives were marked by cycles of rest and disturbance, by floods that both nourished and destroyed, by empires that rose and fell. To see creation itself as a rhythm of harmony and disruption reflected the truth they experienced daily. Nothing could remain unchanged. Growth always carried with it the cost of disturbance. Anu, with his reach into the heavens, may have symbolized the stretch of human vision, the desire to look upward, to imagine beyond. Ea, wise and cunning, may have reflected the value of knowledge in surviving an unpredictable world. Together, these deities marked a shift from silent principles to living personalities, from abstract horizons to gods who acted and desired. It is significant that wisdom itself was imagined as divine so early in the myth. Ea was not simply a force of water, but a god of intellect, craft, and subtlety. His very birth suggested that the ancients saw wisdom not as a human invention, but as something primordial, woven into the foundations of the world. Long before writing, before law, before kingship, they placed wisdom at the center of creation. But wisdom did not remove conflict. Instead, it sharpened it. Apsu's longing for quiet clashed with the unstoppable vitality of his children. The myth captures a universal paradox. The elders, who treasure silence and order, often clash with the young, who overflow with energy and voice. One side desires preservation, the other expansion. Neither is wrong, yet their coexistence cannot remain without strain in this way. The story of the gods was also the story of life itself. Families, cities, civilizations, all contain this tension between rest and motion, between the longing for stillness and the need for growth. The Babylonians encoded this truth into their theology, showing that creation is not a single act, but an unfolding process, each stage carrying both gift and disruption. Archaeological finds from Mesopotamian temples reveal how deeply these ideas shaped ritual life. In offerings, hymns, and prayers, the gods were not distant abstractions, but living powers whose moods and movements mirrored the patterns of the cosmos. Apsu and Tiamat represented vast beginnings, but Anu and Ea brought the divine closer to human understanding. Their qualities, authority, wisdom, fertility, storm, were the very forces people depended on. By retelling their births, listeners were reminded of the balance between the serenity of origins and the turbulence of existence. The image of Apsu, disturbed by his children, lingers with particular force. He is not destroyed yet, not defeated, but already uneasy. The silence he loves is slipping away, carried off by voices, laughter, and conflict. One might ask, is this not the nature of all beginnings? That from quiet we move to noise, from simplicity to complication, from unity to division. Creation, then, is less like the stroke of a painter's brush, and more like the shifting of breath at night. Rest and stirring, silence and sound, balance and disruption. The ancient myth reminds us that even the gods themselves lived by this rhythm. And perhaps this is why the Babylonians told their creation story not as a clean and final event, but as a series of generations, each birth bringing both possibility and tension. They understood that life, whether divine or human, was never still for long. It grew, it stretched, it unsettled. As the divine family expanded, the waters could no longer hold their peace. Stillness was replaced by a rising tide of voices, and within that tide lay the promise of creation and the seed of conflict. One is left to wonder. When growth arrives, is it a blessing or a burden? Is wisdom a gift that brings harmony, or does it sharpen the very tensions it seeks to ease? Perhaps, like the rhythm of breathing, it is both a necessary stirring within the silence of existence. Chapter 4. Apsu's weariness, the desire for silence. The myth tells us that Apsu, the deep freshwater abyss, had once known perfect stillness. His essence was quiet purity, a calm without ripple or voice. But with the births of the younger gods, that stillness began to dissolve. They stirred, they laughed, they moved endlessly through his waters. What was once serene became restless. The silence he cherished could not be recovered. In these moments of weariness, Apsu longed for a return to what had been. He wished not for growth, not for sound, but for the dissolving of all disturbance. The Enuma Elish describes how he considered ending the lives of his children, dissolving them back into the primal waters. For him, this was not cruelty, but relief, a way to restore the harmony of before. In his yearning, we find one of the oldest recorded reflections on existence, the tension between stillness and movement, between silence and life. For the Babylonians, who lived in a land marked by cycles of flooding and harvest, silence was never permanent. The Tigris and Euphrates would swell, roar, and subside, mirroring the very conflict in Apsu's heart. They understood the longing for peace, but they also knew that creation itself demanded disturbance. Life could not remain still. Yet, how often do we also feel Apsu's weariness? That desire, after noise and commotion, to simply rest, to return to the quiet that came before. Scholars often describe Apsu as a fatherly figure. He was the source from which the gods had come, yet he struggled with the vitality of his own offspring. In this way, the myth speaks beyond the divine. It touches the universal rhythm of parent and child, elder and youth. The old treasure, stillness, the young overflow with sound. Apsu's desire to dissolve his children becomes less a tale of destruction and more a parable of generations. What the Enuma Elish preserves here is not only theology but psychology. Apsu's weariness reflects the human awareness that every act of creation brings with it noise, unpredictability, and loss of control. To bring forth life is to surrender peace. The very waters that had once been his comfort were now filled with voices he could not quiet. The Babylonians gave form to this truth in their ritual life. Their temples were built not as places of silence alone, but as spaces where silence and sound met. Priests whispered prayers in quiet corners, but they also sang hymns, clashed cymbals, and recited chants. Worship itself became a dialogue between calm and clamor, between the yearning for peace and the celebration of life. Apsu's struggle was mirrored in their daily acts of devotion. From a philosophical view, Apsu's longing asks us a timeless question. Is silence the truest state of being? If all movement fades, if all creation dissolves, what remains? For the Babylonians, silence was the womb of creation, but once disturbed, it could never be restored without cost. Perhaps this is why Apsu's weariness carries both sympathy and unease. He longs for peace, but peace, in this sense, would require the unmaking of life itself. One can imagine the story told beside the flicker of oil lamps, or under the wide Mesopotamian night sky. To hear of Apsu's weariness would have resonated with listeners after long days of labor, after the noise of markets and the cries of animals. They too may have wished, for a moment, that the world could grow quiet again. Yet, they knew that the sound of life was inseparable from its beauty. The Enuma Elish does not portray Apsu as evil. He is not a villain, but a figure of exhaustion, a god who cannot bear the endless stirring. His desire is deeply human, almost tender, the wish for rest. In this, he is a reminder that myths often preserved not just cosmic events, but inner truths. They gave form to feelings, too vast to name, the ache for silence, the yearning for return, the fatigue that follows creation. Yet, in his weariness, Apsu made a choice. To restore silence, he considered dissolving what had been born. And here the myth reaches its tension. Creation was beautiful, yet it had disturbed him. Could he truly return everything to the calm of before? Or was that calm forever lost? The story leaves us with this fragile balance. Silence is precious, but life itself is noise. Stillness is comforting, but creation requires movement. Apsu embodies one side of this truth, while his children embody the other. Together, they reflect the paradox at the heart of existence. As the waters stirred with unrest, Apsu's desire for silence became more than a passing thought. It became a plan, a resolve. In his longing for peace, he set into motion the first great conflict among the gods. And so, the myth asks quietly, without demand or conclusion, if given the choice, would you preserve the silence of before, or embrace the restless beauty of life as it unfolds? Chapter 5. Ea, the wise guardian of life. Ea, whom the Akkadians called Enki, emerges in the story not with brute strength or fiery wrath, but with foresight. He is remembered as the god of wisdom, of deep waters, of magic that heals and protects. Where Apsu trembled with weariness at the clamor of the younger gods, Ea listened. He perceived not only the sound of their play, but the hidden consequence of their existence. Life was noisy, unpredictable, and uncontainable, and in this restlessness, he sensed both danger and promise. When Apsu resolved to dissolve creation, returning all beings to the silent stillness of primordial waters, Ea did not rush in anger. Instead, he prepared. The texts describe him as crafting spells, not weapons. His strength was knowledge, and his shield was understanding. To confront the Father of Waters, he did not meet him with equal force, but with something more enduring, wisdom shaped into incantation. The myth tells that Ea subdued Apsu, disarmed him, and bound him. Yet this was not destruction for its own sake. Out of Apsu's subdued form, Ea built a dwelling, a sacred chamber that rested upon those same waters of eternity. In this act, a paradox emerges. From what threatened to undo creation, Ea drew the foundation of continuity. From the waters of silence, he raised a sanctuary for life. The Babylonians called this place the Apsu, a divine chamber where Ea resided. It was not a temple of stone, but an imagined cosmic house, a place where wisdom could watch over the generations of gods and through them, the unfolding of the world. Here, knowledge was not separate from creation. It was interwoven with its survival. Across Mesopotamian tradition, Ea's character remained consistent. In Sumerian tales, he was Enki, the clever one, lord of the fresh waters beneath the earth. He was not a warrior in the conventional sense, but a guardian of balance. When storms raged, when divine anger threatened to spill into annihilation, Ea was often the one to whisper counsel, to offer a path that spared life rather than erased it. One of the most famous echoes of this role appears in the great flood story of Atrahasis, and later in the Epic of Gilgamesh. When the gods resolved to send a deluge to wipe away humanity, it was Ea who secretly warned a mortal, guiding him to build a vessel and preserve life. Just as he had once shielded the younger gods from Apsu's silence, he again placed wisdom between destruction and survival. It is no wonder he was called the guardian of life. The image of Ea weaving spells across the waters is more than a piece of mythology. It reflects an ancient intuition that knowledge itself is protective, not in the sense of physical defense, but in the way insight shields us from repeating the same cycles of loss. To know is to prepare, and to prepare is to endure. In Mesopotamian society, wisdom was not abstract. It was practical, tied to the very rhythms of existence. Farmers read the rivers. Scribes preserved the epics. Priests recited rituals to calm the gods. In each, the spirit of Ea lived on, the belief that understanding, observation, and sacred knowledge could hold chaos at bay. The symbolism of Ea building his dwelling on Apsu's subdued waters carries deep meaning. It suggests that the very forces that threaten to undo us can also be the ground of renewal. Apsu's silence, once feared as annihilation, became the base for a sanctuary of life. Perhaps the myth is reminding us that peace is not the absence of sound, but its transformation. Out of weariness, wisdom creates rest. Out of threat, it builds continuity. Imagine, for a moment, the scene. The waters of Apsu, still and endless. A hush that could dissolve all. And then, soft ripples forming as Ea speaks his incantations, words woven like threads of light across the deep. Slowly, what seemed like an ending becomes a foundation. The dwelling rises, invisible yet eternal. A chamber not of walls but of presence, the place where wisdom lives. This story asks a quiet question. Is wisdom something we gather from beyond? A gift of the gods? Or is it drawn from within, like hidden waters beneath the earth? The Babylonians might say both. For them, Ea was not distant. He dwelt in the subterranean deep, close to the wells and rivers that nourished daily life. To drink from water was, in some sense, to partake of his gift. To survive was to live under his watch. The myths also suggest that wisdom is never loud. Ea does not shout, nor does he overwhelm. His guidance arrives as whispers, dreams, symbols, and spells. It is subtle, requiring patience to hear and trust to follow. This quietness is not weakness but strength, for it moves gently while shaping destiny. In our own reflections, one might see a truth here that transcends myth. Destruction often comes quickly, with noise and force. Preservation is slower, quieter, requiring foresight and care. The world may honor the warrior who conquers, but the story of Ea reminds us of another kind of heroism, the one who sustains, who shields, who prepares the dwelling where life may continue. In the temple cities of Mesopotamia, the cult of Ea reflected this balance. Priests invoked him when waters threatened, when sickness spread, when divine anger was feared. His magic was not chaotic sorcery, but ordered ritual, aligning human practice with cosmic rhythm. To trust Ea was to believe that wisdom could tame even the most primordial of forces. And perhaps, this is why his story lingers with such quiet resonance. We know the noise of life, the weariness it can bring, the looming shadow of silence. Yet, like Ea, we are invited to respond not with despair but with understanding. To build, even upon waters of dissolution, a place where life can rest. So, as the myth turns, Apsu's threat of silence is transformed into Ea's dwelling of wisdom. From destruction comes protection. From the father's weariness arises the son's guardianship. And in this exchange, one of the earliest civilizations left us a profound reflection that wisdom, born of listening and foresight, is itself a form of shelter. Perhaps, as you drift deeper into these ancient waters, you may wonder, in the noise of your own life, where does wisdom dwell? Is it in the silence you seek, or in the spells you weave across the restless surface of the world? Chapter 6. The birth of Marduk, a child of destiny, from the chamber that Ea had built upon the subdued waters of Apsu, a new life emerged. The myths tell of a child born in that sacred place, radiant and extraordinary. His name was Marduk. He came into being not as a fragile infant, but as a being marked from the beginning by signs of destiny. His body grew tall and strong, his form dazzling in power. His eyes shone with a brilliance compared to fire, a light that pierced through shadow. Even the wind bent to his command, swirling at his call as though eager to serve him. For the Babylonians, Marduk's arrival was more than the birth of another god. It was the beginning of a new rhythm in the cosmos. Up until this moment, creation had been a contest between stillness and noise, silence and the play of life. Apsu longed for peace. Ea protected the younger gods with wisdom. But with Marduk, something different entered the story. He was not only a defender, he was a figure of promise, one destined to shape the very order of the universe. The descriptions of Marduk in the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, are rich with awe. His face was said to outshine even the brightest of deities. His limbs grew beyond ordinary measure, symbolizing not just physical might, but the expansive nature of his power. The winds themselves became his allies, obeying him as if he were their natural master. In him, the elements recognized their commander. This was not coincidence, but destiny. The Babylonians believed that Marduk had been marked from his very birth to confront forces far greater than any god before him. In these myths, birth is never simple. Each divine birth is also symbolic, a reflection of shifting cosmic tides. The birth of Marduk represents the rise of a new principle, order born from power, yet tempered by destiny. The world, unstable and restless, was in need of a champion. Marduk's arrival was the answer, though at first it appeared only as potential, like a seed resting quietly in the soil. It is striking to consider how the ancients saw destiny inscribed at birth. In our own time, we often imagine life as open, uncertain, unfolding step by step. But for the Babylonians, the appearance of Marduk was already the turning of fate itself. He was not merely another divine child, but the one chosen to bring balance when the scales of creation threatened to collapse from the vantage of history. Marduk's story reveals something about the people who preserved it. Babylon itself, the city that would one day rise as a center of empire, required a god who could embody greatness, strength, and kingship. Marduk became that figure. His birth, though wrapped in myth, mirrored the city's own aspiration to emerge from the midst of older powers and to claim a central place in the order of the world. And yet, before he became Babylon's champion, Marduk was still a child of Ea's dwelling, nurtured by the waters of wisdom. This detail is important. His destiny was not divorced from the past, but born from it. The wisdom of Ea, the victory over Apsu, formed the ground from which Marduk rose. His power, radiant as it was, did not come from nowhere. It was rooted in the balance established by his father. The Babylonians seemed to recognize that even the strongest heroes stand on foundations prepared by others. The image of Marduk's fiery eyes holds a symbolic depth. Fire in ancient Mesopotamia was not only destructive, but illuminating. It revealed what was hidden, warded off the darkness, and brought warmth to ritual. For Marduk to be born with eyes like fire was to say that he saw more clearly than others. His gaze was not clouded. He could pierce through chaos, discerning the path to order. In a world where confusion and conflict were constant threats, The ability to see truly was perhaps the greatest power of all. His command over the winds further reveals his role. In Mesopotamian thought, the winds were forces of both blessing and terror. They carried storms, dust, and the breath of life itself. To rule them was to command both fury and renewal. Marduk's mastery of the winds hinted that he could wield destruction when needed, but also bring calm when balance demanded it. This duality would define his later role in the cosmic struggle. What makes Marduk's birth especially profound is that it begins quietly. The epics do not describe him immediately leaping into battle or seizing dominion. Instead, he grows, his powers gradually revealed, his destiny quietly unfolding. It is a reminder that even the mightiest transformations often begin in stillness, hidden within chambers of rest, waiting for the appointed time. The Babylonians may have drawn comfort from this vision. In a world of constant change, floods, wars, shifting kingdoms, they imagined that the forces of order were not absent, only preparing. Marduk's childhood becomes a symbol of hope, that in the silence before upheaval, strength is gathering, ready to rise when most needed. Reflecting on this, one might ask, where in our own lives does such a rhythm occur? What seeds of strength lie hidden, quietly forming beneath the surface of noise and weariness? The myth suggests that destiny often begins unnoticed. Like a child born in a chamber of wisdom, radiant but not yet revealed. Later, Marduk would become the central figure of Babylonian religion, celebrated as the king of the gods. But here, at his birth, we see only the beginning, the gentle spark that would one day ignite into cosmic transformation. His presence in the myth is like the dawn when the sky is still soft, and light slowly gathers before the full brilliance of day. In this way, the Babylonians placed their trust not only in immediate strength, but in unfolding destiny. They believed that the cosmos itself had a rhythm, that when silence threatened to drown creation, wisdom responded, and from wisdom, new strength was born. Marduk's arrival is that moment, the seed of order planted in the midst of uncertainty as you listen. Perhaps you feel the subtle resonance of this ancient reflection, that even in the restless waters of life, a quiet promise is forming. That strength, radiant and commanding, may already be within you, waiting for its season. The birth of Marduk is not only the story of a god, it is the story of potential, of light within darkness, of destiny within uncertainty, of the gentle spark that grows until even the winds must listen. And so the myth leaves us with a question, soft yet enduring, in the chamber of your own stillness, what child of destiny is waiting to awaken? Chapter 7. Tiamat's wrath, the sea stirs to war. The stillness that once lay upon the cosmic waters was broken. Apsu, the father of beginnings, had been subdued and silenced by Ea's wisdom. His death was not simply the end of one god, but the turning of an ancient balance. In the shadow of this act, the quiet sea, Tiamat, awoke. No longer the patient mother of the firstborn deities, she became a storm. Her depths, once calm, began to churn. Her silence became sound. Her grief became wrath. The Babylonians described Tiamat's rising anger in images of overwhelming force. She was the endless sea, vast and unknowable, now stirred to motion. In her grief, she gave birth to creatures unlike any that had come before. From her body flowed serpents with scales of venom, dragons with fire in their breath, and scorpion men whose stings brought death. There were storms in the form of raging beasts, and monstrous hounds born of her fury. These were not gods in the form of cosmic principles like the firstborn. They were beings of chaos, raw and unshaped, embodying fear itself to the people of Mesopotamia. The image of Tiamat was not an abstraction. The waters that surrounded their land were both a gift and a terror. The rivers Tigris and Euphrates gave them fertile soil, sustenance, and trade. Yet floods, storms, and droughts could just as easily bring destruction. In Tiamat's wrath, they saw reflected the untamed side of nature. Her army of monsters represented the unpredictable forces of the world, the ones that could not be reasoned with. The ones that emerged suddenly, like a storm breaking across the horizon. The myth is striking in how it shifts the role of Tiamat. In the beginning, she had been the quiet partner of Apsu, mingling her waters with his to bring forth creation. But when he was taken from her, she became the embodiment of vengeance. This change reflects a deep insight into how the ancients viewed existence, that life itself is bound to cycles of harmony and disruption. The same sea that nourishes can also drown. The same mother who gives life can become the destroyer when balance is broken. What is most haunting is how the Babylonians imagined these forces not simply as natural disasters, but as living beings. Serpents, dragons, scorpion men, all emerging from the womb of Tiamat's fury. They are the embodiment of nightmare and myth, but also of reality as it was experienced by those who lived close to the rivers and storms. The scorpion men, for example, were later described as guardians of the sun's path in other Mesopotamian myths, towering figures at the edges of the world. Here, they begin as soldiers of chaos. The myth reveals how imagination transforms danger into form, giving it shape so it can be named, told, and perhaps understood. It is easy to think of this as a simple story of good against evil, but the Babylonians did not see it so sharply. Tiamat was not purely wicked. She was wounded, betrayed, and roused to protect what she felt was hers. Her wrath was the natural consequence of violation. In this way, the myth resists simple judgment. Instead, it presents a universe where conflict is woven into the very fabric of existence. One might pause here and reflect. What does it mean that creation itself was imagined as inseparable from conflict? Could it be that the Babylonians understood something deeply human, that growth often arises from tension, that order emerges not from stillness alone, but from the storms that force us to rebuild? The Enuma Elish tells us that Tiamat took a new consort, Kingu, to stand at her side. She granted him the Tablet of Destinies, a symbol of supreme authority. Whoever held it could decree fate itself. By giving this to Kingu, Tiamat ensured that her army was not only one of brute force, but also of destiny. This gesture reveals the depth of her determination. She would not simply rage against the younger gods. She would rewrite the order of existence. For the listener, the story becomes more than myth. It is a reflection of the timeless human fear of what cannot be controlled. To live by rivers and seas is to live with the constant reminder that life is fragile. The waters may bless, but they may also rise without warning. The monsters of Tiamat's brood are the shadows of this truth, taking shape in stories so they could be remembered and respected. And yet, there is also beauty in this vision. For, out of the turmoil of Tiamat's army, creation itself would eventually be reshaped. Her fury was terrifying, but it was also the force that set the stage for Marduk's rise and the ordering of the cosmos. In this way, the myth reminds us that even the darkest storms can carry within them the seeds of new beginnings. The Babylonians lived in a land where life was always at the mercy of nature. Floods might wash away fields in one season, while drought left the soil cracked in another. By telling of Tiamat, they were not only explaining the origins of their gods, they were telling the story of their own lives, fragile, vulnerable, but also capable of endurance. In the rhythm of this story, one can almost hear the waves of the sea, rising and falling, whispering, then roaring. Tiamat is not merely an enemy. She is the sound of existence itself, ungoverned and alive. And so the story closes softly, not with victory or defeat, but with reflection. Tiamat's wrath is frightening, yes, but also deeply human in its expression of loss. She is the embodiment of a truth that stretches across time, that behind every act of creation lies the shadow of conflict, and within every storm there is the mystery of what may yet be born. Perhaps the question lingers, as gentle as the tide, when the waters of life rise around us. Do we resist them, or do we listen for the hidden beginnings they may carry? Chapter 7. Tiamat's wrath, the sea stirs to war. The stillness that once lay upon the cosmic waters was broken. Apsu, the father of beginnings, had been subdued and silenced by Ea's wisdom. His death was not simply the end of one god, but the turning of an ancient balance. In the shadow of this act, the quiet sea, Tiamat, awoke. No longer the patient mother of the firstborn deities, she became a storm. Her depths, once calm, began to churn. Her silence became sound. Her grief became wrath. The Babylonians described Tiamat's rising anger in images of overwhelming force. She was the endless sea, vast and unknowable, now stirred to motion. In her grief, she gave birth to creatures unlike any that had come before. From her body flowed serpents with scales of venom, dragons with fire in their breath, and scorpion men whose stings brought death. There were storms in the form of raging beasts, and monstrous hounds born of her fury. These were not gods in the form of cosmic principles like the firstborn. They were beings of chaos, raw and unshaped, embodying fear itself to the people of Mesopotamia. The image of Tiamat was not an abstraction. The waters that surrounded their land were both a gift and a terror. The rivers Tigris and Euphrates gave them fertile soil, sustenance, and trade. Yet floods, storms, and droughts could just as easily bring destruction. In Tiamat's wrath, they saw reflected the untamed side of nature. Her army of monsters represented the unpredictable forces of the world, the ones that could not be reasoned with, the ones that emerged suddenly, like a storm breaking across the horizon. The myth is striking in how it shifts the role of Tiamat. In the beginning, she had been the quiet partner of Apsu, mingling her waters with his to bring forth creation. But when he was taken from her, she became the embodiment of vengeance. This change reflects a deep insight into how the ancients viewed existence, that life itself is bound to cycles of harmony and disruption. The same sea that nourishes can also drown. The same mother who gives life can become the destroyer when balance is broken. What is most haunting is how the Babylonians imagined these forces not simply as natural disasters, but as living beings. Serpents, dragons, scorpion men, all emerging from the womb of Tiamat's fury. They are the embodiment of nightmare and myth, but also of reality as it was experienced by those who lived close to the rivers and storms. The scorpion men, for example, were later described as guardians of the sun's path in other Mesopotamian myths, towering figures at the edges of the world. Here, they begin as soldiers of chaos. The myth reveals how imagination transforms danger into form, giving it shape so it can be named, told, and perhaps understood. It is easy to think of this as a simple story of good against evil, but the Babylonians did not see it so sharply. Tiamat was not purely wicked. She was wounded, betrayed, and roused to protect what she felt was hers. Her wrath was the natural consequence of violation. In this way, the myth resists simple judgment. Instead, it presents a universe where conflict is woven into the very fabric of existence. One might pause here and reflect. What does it mean that creation itself was imagined as inseparable from conflict? Could it be that the Babylonians understood something deeply human, that growth often arises from tension, that order emerges not from stillness alone, but from the storms that force us to rebuild? The Enuma Elish tells us that Tiamat took a new consort, Kingu, to stand at her side. She granted him the Tablet of Destinies, a symbol of supreme authority. Whoever held it could decree fate itself. By giving this to Kingu, Tiamat ensured that her army was not only one of brute force, but also of destiny. This gesture reveals the depth of her determination. She would not simply rage against the younger gods. She would rewrite the order of existence. For the listener, the story becomes more than myth. It is a reflection of the timeless human fear of what cannot be controlled. To live by rivers and seas is to live with the constant reminder that life is fragile. The waters may bless, but they may also rise without warning. The monsters of Tiamat's brood are the shadows of this truth, taking shape in stories so they could be remembered and respected. And yet, there is also beauty in this vision. For, out of the turmoil of Tiamat's army, creation itself would eventually be reshaped. Her fury was terrifying, but it was also the force that set the stage for Marduk's rise and the ordering of the cosmos. In this way, the myth reminds us that even the darkest storms can carry within them the seeds of new beginnings. The Babylonians lived in a land where life was always at the mercy of nature. Floods might wash away fields in one season, while drought left the soil cracked in another. By telling of Tiamat, they were not only explaining the origins of their gods, they were telling the story of their own lives, fragile, vulnerable, but also capable of endurance. In the rhythm of this story, one can almost hear the waves of the sea, rising and falling, whispering, then roaring. Tiamat is not merely an enemy. She is the sound of existence itself, ungoverned and alive. And so the story closes softly, not with victory or defeat, but with reflection. Tiamat's wrath is frightening, yes, but also deeply human in its expression of loss. She is the embodiment of a truth that stretches across time, that behind every act of creation lies the shadow of conflict, and within every storm there is the mystery of what may yet be born. Perhaps the question lingers, as gentle as the tide, when the waters of life rise around us. Do we resist them, or do we listen for the hidden beginnings they may carry? Chapter 8. The 11 Monsters of Tiamat. The myth tells us that Tiamat, the great sea mother, was not content with her wrath alone. The death of Apsu had pierced her stillness, transforming her from silent waters into a force of storm. Yet fury, to endure, must take shape. And so, from her own substance, she began to fashion beings unlike any seen before. 11 creatures, each a mingling of forms, each a fragment of chaos-given body. These were not ordinary beasts of land or sea. They were hybrids, stitched together by imagination and dread. To the Babylonians, such beings embodied the essence of what lies beyond, order, the unmeasured, the undefined. They were more than threats. They were symbols of everything that could not be tamed. The number itself, flevonis, curious. In Mesopotamian thought, 10 often marked completion and balance. 11 stood beyond, just one step further, spilling past the circle of harmony. It was excess, rupture. The reminder that chaos always has one piece more than what the world can bear. The texts that survive from the Enuma Elish describe these monstrous children of Tiamat in careful yet off-filled lines. There were serpent dragons, with scales hard as stone and venom that burned the flesh. There were great lions with human faces, fusing predator and person into one haunting form. There were scorpion men whose tails promised death, guardians at the edge of the known world. There were fishmen, birdmen, horned creatures whose shadows stretched like omens across the imagination of Babylon. Each bore names that have slipped through history, though fragments remain. The horned serpent, the furious sphinx, the mighty dragon, the rabid dog, the storm demon. To the listener of that time, these were not inventions of idle fear. They were the very possibility of chaos, pressed into recognizable, yet unearthly shapes. In these monsters we glimpse the way ancient peoples understood reality itself. To live by the rivers of Mesopotamia was to know both gift and threat. The waters gave crops, sustained life, and carried trade. Yet those same waters could rise, ungoverned, sweeping away entire villages. The desert beyond the fertile plain held scorpions and lions, predators who lurked beyond the safety of walls. The myth took these scattered dangers and gathered them together under Tiamat's command. One might ask, were these monsters imagined as real or as symbols only? The answer, as so often in ancient belief, lies between. The Babylonians did not divide the world into strict categories of fact and symbol as modern thought does. A monster was both a creature of imagination and at the same time a truth about the forces of life. To say Tiamat created monsters was to say that chaos itself reveals its face in many ways, some visible, some hidden. It is striking that Tiamat's creatures are described not only as terrifying, but also as richly adorned. They carry brightness in their eyes, horns like crowns, bodies that gleam with unnatural strength. This suggests that chaos, though feared, was not stripped of beauty. In the unknown, there was fascination as much as dread. To dream of such beings was to dream of possibility. In this sense, the monsters are not only enemies of the gods, they are necessary counterparts. For without the presence of chaos, the triumph of order would carry no weight. Without the dragon, there can be no hero. Without the wilderness, the city loses meaning. Scholars of Mesopotamian religion often note that these figures echo other mythologies of the region. The serpent recalls Ningxita, a guardian deity tied to the underworld. The lion-headed monster suggests earlier protective spirits carved in stone. The scorpion man appears again in the Epic of Gilgamesh, guarding the gates of the sun. These shared images remind us that myths were not closed stories, but living traditions, borrowing and reshaping across generations. One can imagine how these figures entered the art and ritual life of Babylon. Amulets bore the shapes of hybrid beings. Clay tablets depicted their strange limbs. In the dim light of temples, worshippers would have spoken their names, perhaps in warning, perhaps in awe. To remember the monsters was to acknowledge the world's fragile balance. Yet the question lingers, why would a mother figure like Tiamat create beings so fierce? In one sense, it was vengeance, a response to the loss of her mate Apsu. But, on another level, it is the natural role of chaos to generate. Creation is not always gentle. Sometimes it begins with distortion, with figures that frighten even as they fascinate. From disorder, life finds its path forward. You may wonder what it means to carry such images in the mind today. The monsters of Tiamat, unsettling and strange, can be seen as symbols of the unshaped regions of our own experience. The fears that have no clear face, the desires that cross boundaries, the possibilities that lie outside the order we know. They remind us that within chaos, there is always a seed of new creation. The Enuma Elish never lingers too long on these monsters individually. It names them, describes them, then gathers them together into an army under Tiamat's banner. They are many, but they move as one, force the embodiment of chaos made flesh. In the quiet of myth, they march not with noise, but with the steady, inevitable presence of all that cannot be controlled. And so, the 11 creatures stand at the edge of the Babylonian imagination. Neither wholly real nor wholly unreal. Neither entirely dreadful nor entirely beautiful. They are liminal beings, thresholds between what is known and what is not, as the ancient storyteller would have recited these lines. Listeners might have felt both fear and wonder rise within them, like the sound of waves in the distance. The monsters were reminders that the cosmos itself was born not from stillness, but from struggle. That out of the clash of forces, life took form. Even now, when we reflect on these strange beings, the question remains: are they to be feared as enemies of order, or cherished as carriers of creativity hidden in the heart of chaos? The answer is left suspended, like the sea before the storm. For, in the myth of Tiamat's monsters, danger and beauty walk side by side, neither yielding fully to the other. And perhaps, in that delicate balance, the story continues to breathe. Chapter 9. Kingu, the chosen commander. Among the 11 monstrous beings that Tiamat summoned from the depths of her anger, one rose above the rest. His name was Kingu, unlike the other creatures, who bore bodies stitched from fragments of beast and terror. Kingu was given a special role. He was not simply one among many in the army of chaos. He was raised up as Tiamat's chosen, her consort, her general dot to Kingu. She entrusted something that no other being possessed. She placed upon his chest the tablet of destinies. In Mesopotamian thought, this object was not a mere ornament. It was the very heart of authority. Whoever held it could decree the order of the cosmos itself. It was believed that the tablet carried the power to establish kingship, to fix the courses of stars, to bind gods and mortals alike to their fates. In Kingu's hands, chaos itself wore the crown of destiny. This moment in the myth reveals a profound fear, and at the same time, a deep fascination. The Babylonians knew well that destiny was not always gentle. Floods, invasions, sickness, these came like decrees from beyond. To imagine that such fate could be written down, held, and carried was both comforting and terrifying. If destiny was inscribed, then perhaps it had meaning. But if it could be stolen, worn, or passed to another, then nothing was secure. The Tablet of Destinies was a recurring symbol in Mesopotamian religion. Other myths speak of it changing hands, stolen by one god, reclaimed by another. Its power was absolute, but also precarious, for it could slip from its bearer in a single act of betrayal. To entrust it to Kingu was to give chaos itself the authority to rule. In this way, the myth pressed the tension between order and disorder into a single image, who was Kingu. Then, beyond the tablet he carried, the texts describe him as mighty, gifted with the authority of command. But compared to the grand figure of Tiamat, he seems almost secondary. His rise was not born of his own strength, but from the favor she placed upon him. Some scholars suggest that Kingu was a later addition to the myth, shaped to personify the idea that chaos needs not only force but leadership. Others see him as the shadowed double of Marduk, a rival champion who would be tested and found wanting. In the story, Kingu becomes the general of Tiamat's army. The 11 monsters move under his command, their wrath guided by his authority. He is not chaos itself, but the voice that directs it, and yet, in many ways, he remains passive. His strength lies less in action than in the dangerous gift he carries. He is destiny embodied, but destiny awaiting its contest. It is worth pausing to reflect on the tablet of destinies itself. Archaeologists and philologists remind us that writing was sacred in Mesopotamia. To inscribe words on clay was not only communication, but an act of permanence, binding events to the fabric of reality. A decree written by a king or a god was not merely symbolic, it was believed to alter the order of things. The tablet of destinies carried this belief to its highest form. Whoever bore it could quite literally set the course of the universe. But how fragile such power must have seemed. If destiny can be written, then it can also be rewritten. If fate can be carried, then it can also be dropped. The Babylonians lived with this tension daily. They performed rituals to avert evil omens, to redirect fate, to rewrite misfortune. And yet, beneath their prayers was the quiet recognition that the ultimate lines of destiny lay beyond human reach. Perhaps this is why Kingu feels less like a villain, and more like a mirror of human longing, to be chosen, to be given authority, to carry the fate of all things, who has not wondered what it would be like to hold such a burden, and at the same time, who has not feared the weight of such responsibility. To bear destiny is to stand on a precipice, knowing that one mistake might unravel everything. When Tiamat placed a tablet upon Kingu, she did more than appoint a commander. She revealed the dangerous truth that power is never only about force. True power lies in the shaping of meaning, in the writing of what will be. The monsters she created embodied fear, but the tablet embodied inevitability. Together, they formed an army that was not only terrifying, but ordained. And yet, in the quiet flow of the story, we sense the fragility of this arrangement. Kingu holds the tablet, but not with the conviction of a born ruler. He carries it as one chosen, perhaps reluctantly, perhaps naively. In him, chaos has a leader, but not a hero. It is as if the myth prepares us for what must come, the moment when destiny will shift again, wrested from his hands, claimed by another. Still, the image of Kingu remains powerful. He is not remembered for deeds or victories, but for the symbol placed upon him. The tablet of destinies, resting against his chest, glowed with the authority of the cosmos. Around him, the monsters gathered, and Tiamat's fury surged like a storm. For a time, it seemed as though chaos truly held the future. One cannot help but ask, what does it mean to imagine destiny as something tangible, something that can be worn, guarded, or stolen? Does it suggest that fate is never fixed, that it is always vulnerable to the hands of those bold enough to grasp it? Or does it remind us that all authority, even cosmic authority, is precarious, always at risk of shifting with the tides of power? The Babylonians left no single answer. They left only the image. Kingu, the chosen commander, bearing the tablet of destinies, leading the hosts of chaos under Tiamat's gaze. It is an image that lingers, not because it promises certainty, but because it whispers of mystery. For in the end, destiny remains both close and distant. Close enough to be imagined as a tablet, a symbol held in human hands. Distant enough to remind us that no one god or mortal can keep it forever. Chapter 10. The Council of the Gods, Fear in the Assembly. The sea had stirred, and Tiamat had risen. Her waters no longer whispered of quiet creation, but thundered with wrath. The 11 monstrous beings moved at her side, and Kingu, now adorned with the tablet of destinies, commanded their strength. Against such a host, the younger gods felt their immortality tremble. The myth tells that they gathered in council, an assembly of divine voices, yet hushed with uncertainty. For though gods were eternal, they were not invulnerable. To stand before Tiamat's storm was to stand before the boundless force of chaos, mother of them all. Even divinity recoiled at the thought. Fear, in these lines of the Enuma Elish, takes on a striking presence. It spreads through the assembly not as panic, but as hesitation, as silence. No one stepped forward to challenge Tiamat. None volunteered to take the burden of battle. Each god looked to the other, waiting, hoping another might rise. It is in this moment that the myth reveals something profoundly human. For here, the gods are not untouchable figures of endless confidence. They are shaken, they debate, they falter. Fear is shown not as weakness, but as an inevitable shadow that comes before the choice of courage. The Babylonians knew such fear well. Life along the rivers of Mesopotamia was always uncertain. Floods could destroy, droughts could starve, enemies could invade. To imagine the gods themselves hesitating was to recognize a truth about existence, that even those with power beyond measure must reckon with doubt. The assembly of the gods became a mirror for the councils of men, where leaders sat in silence, weighing danger, reluctant to bear the cost of action. The text describes this council as filled with unease. The younger deities debated, but their words carried no resolve. The storm of Tiamat loomed too large. The tablet of destinies in Kingu's hands seemed to fix the outcome before the first blow was struck. To challenge her army was to walk towards certain destruction. And so they delayed, they whispered, they hesitated. This pause, this gathering in silence, is more than a detail in the myth. It captures a universal threshold, the moment before choice, before courage awakens. In stories across cultures, such scenes recur. The knights who hesitate before the dragon's cave, the warriors who pause at the edge of battle, the leaders who debate before declaring war. The Babylonian myth frames even the gods within this pattern, as if to say that hesitation is part of the path to bravery. The council also reveals the weight of responsibility. None of the gods wished to carry the burden of fate, to risk their own being against the fury of the sea. To step forward would mean not only danger, but accountability for victory or for loss. In this way, the myth quietly reflects on leadership. Who will rise? Who will bear the cost for all? Some scholars suggest that the hesitation of the gods echoes the structure of Mesopotamian society itself. In times of crisis, kings held councils with priests, generals, and scribes. Decisions were made in the shadow of great uncertainty. Just as the gods deliberated over the storm of Tiamat, so too did human rulers deliberate over floods, plagues, or war. The myth, then, served as both reflection and instruction, that hesitation was natural, but action must one day come. And yet, this chapter does not rush to resolution. It lingers in the pause, in the quiet wait of fear. The text allows us to imagine the gods gathered together, their voices subdued, their eyes averted. Even immortals could look away from the storm for a moment. Fear is often seen as the opposite of courage, but here it becomes its companion. Without fear, courage would have no meaning. Without hesitation, resolve would not shine as brightly. The Babylonians seemed to understand this. In portraying the gods themselves as hesitant, they acknowledged the reality of fear as a thread woven into the fabric of existence. One might reflect, gently, on how often this pattern repeats in life. How often one sits in council with oneself, debating, hesitating, waiting for the courage to rise. The silence before a decision is its own kind of assembly. And in that pause, there is both weight and possibility. The myth leaves us in that quiet. The storm of Tiamat rages beyond the council. Her monsters wait. Kingu clutches the tablet of destinies, and the gods sit together, fearful, uncertain. It is a reminder that even in myth, choice is never simple. Even gods must pass through silence before they act. And perhaps, in that truth, there is a reflection of our own. For who has not sat in that same pause, held by hesitation, wondering if courage will awaken at last? Chapter 11. The Rise of Marduk, a champion chosen in the hush of the divine assembly. When hesitation had filled the air like smoke, a single figure rose. It was Marduk, the son of Ea and Damkina, young among the gods, yet already marked by distinction. His eyes were said to shine with an inner fire. His voice, clear and measured, broke the silence that the others could not. He declared that he would face Tiamat. He would take up the cause the others feared. But his pledge came with a condition. He would not fight as an equal among wavering allies. He would not risk himself while the throne of heaven remained disputed. If he was to be their champion, he demanded full authority. He asked that his word be final, his command unchallenged. Supreme sovereignty over gods and destinies alike. This demand was not arrogance alone. In the structure of myth, it speaks of a deeper truth. Order cannot triumph over chaos without unity. To face the sea dragon of primordial waters, Marduk required not only weapons, but trust. The scattered wills of frightened gods had to be gathered into a single resolve. His rise was the forging of a center where before there was only hesitation. The council listened, and their fear gave way to necessity. None among them could deny the logic. Tiamat's storm swelled greater each day. Her monsters roamed unchecked, and Kingu held the tablet of destinies against them. No other dared step forward. And so, reluctantly but decisively, they placed their hopes in Marduk. In this moment, the Enuma Elish shifts. Before, the tale had been one of disorder and strife, of parental gods slain and seas stirred into fury. Now, the story bends toward resolution, but it does so by elevating one among many, choosing a singular champion. Ancient listeners may have felt in this moment the stirrings of their own kingship reflected in heaven. Just as earthly kings ruled cities by gathering councils under their command, so too Marduk rose as ruler by uniting divine voices into one will. The myth captures a tension still familiar today. Fear spreads easily when no one dares to lead. Choices fracture into indecision. Yet courage is contagious. When one speaks with resolve, silence breaks, and others lean toward hope. Perhaps the Babylonians recognized in Marduk's demand the truth that even gods cannot overcome chaos without clear direction. What followed was not merely agreement, but ceremony. Marduk was given his place in a formal rite of elevation. Ancient lines of the poem describe how he was honored, seated apart, robes arranged, weapons prepared. He was given a bow, a net, and a mighty mace. He was entrusted with winds and storms to wield as his allies. Each gift was a recognition not only of his role, but of the transfer of divine authority itself. The gods feasted, drinking sweet wine, binding themselves to the oath they had made. These details, simple yet vivid, matter in myth. They remind us that power is not only claimed but ritually confirmed. By eating and drinking together, the gods affirmed their choice. By giving him weapons, they invested their hopes into tangible form. Marduk's rise was not sudden, but enacted, step by step, until it stood unquestioned. One might ask, why Marduk? Why this youthful god among so many? Part of the answer is historical. The poem itself is a Babylonian text, composed to elevate Babylon's city god above older rivals. Just as Marduk overcame Tiamat in myth, Babylon rose to dominance over the cities of Mesopotamia. In the mythic stage, theology and politics intertwined. A god's victory reflected a city's supremacy. But there is also symbolic depth. Marduk embodies the qualities needed to face chaos: vision, strength, and the insistence on order. His demand for sovereignty mirrors the necessity of decisive rule. In him, myth personifies the human longing for a champion, someone who will step forward when all others hesitate. The story slows here, in the council chamber, because this is the hinge upon which the great battle turns. Without this moment of resolve, there would be no contest, no triumph, no shaping of the cosmos. The pause before action is just as vital as the action itself. It is worth reflecting. How many times has human history repeated this pattern? A gathering of leaders paralyzed by fear, a rising threat too vast to ignore, and then one voice that dares to claim responsibility. Myth magnifies this moment, placing it among gods, but the structure remains familiar. The Babylonians, listening to this story during festival recitations, may have felt both awe and reassurance. Awe that a divine champion had stood forth to face the terror of the sea. Reassurance that their own king, seated in ritual as Marduk's earthly counterpart, would likewise defend order against the threats of their world. In this way, myth served as both theology and mirror. The heavens reflected the earth, and the earth reflected the heavens. The courage of Marduk was not only the courage of one god, but a pattern for human rulers, for families, for communities. And yet, beneath this structure lies an unanswered question. What does it mean that even gods trembled? That divinity itself hesitated before chaos? The myth does not hide this truth. It does not pretend the council stood fearless. It admits their silence, their refusal, their shadowed uncertainty. Perhaps this was part of its wisdom, to remind listeners that fear is universal, that hesitation precedes every true act of courage. Marduk's rise, then, is not only a story of power, it is also a story of transformation. He becomes more than he was, not by strength alone, but by accepting the burden others could not bear. In his demand for sovereignty, he reveals the paradox of leadership. Authority is claimed, but also given. It is both an act of will and an act of trust. The chapter closes not with battle, but with readiness. Marduk, now armed and anointed, stands as chosen champion. The gods look to him with mingled fear and relief, knowing their destinies rest in his hands. And we, hearing the story, are left to wonder, at what moment does courage awaken in us? What hidden strength waits for the silence of hesitation to end? And when it comes, are we prepared to claim not only the fight, but the responsibility that follows? Like the Babylonians, we linger in the stillness before action, resting in the quiet strength of chosen courage. Chapter 12. Weapons of the Storm. Marduk arms himself. The silence of hesitation had broken. Marduk, now chosen as champion, stood before the assembly of gods. Yet his readiness was not enough on its own. To face the vastness of Tiamat, he required more than courage. He needed weapons fit for a struggle not of mortals, but of cosmic scale. And so the gods prepared them for him. They placed in his hands a bow, strong and unyielding, strung with the power of their will. Arrows were fitted, sharp as lightning, swift as the coursing winds. A net was woven, vast as the firmament, to ensnare the great dragon when she thrashed against him. Into his keeping they entrusted the winds themselves, airy forces invisible yet unrelenting, that they might carry him, strengthen him, and scatter his enemy's breath. These gifts were not only armaments, each carried meaning, deep and symbolic. In the world of the ancient Babylonians, weapons of the gods were more than tools of destruction. They were embodiments of cosmic order, visible symbols that chaos could be named, grasped and overcome. The bow, drawn and released, reflects the arc of decision. From stillness, a line of force is released, traveling outward with clarity. The arrow does not hesitate once loosed. It is commitment in flight. To give Marduk such a weapon was to grant him not only skill, but the clarity of judgment needed to pierce confusion. The net, cast wide, was an image of containment. Chaos, by its nature, seeks to spread, to overflow, to surge beyond boundaries. The net was woven as a reminder that disorder can be caught, held, and framed. In the daily life of Mesopotamia, nets gathered fish from the waters, creatures that would otherwise vanish into the deep. In myth, the same principle became divine. The sea itself, restless and raging, could be drawn into form by threads of intention, and the winds, gifts invisible, yet more powerful than stone or iron. They were trusted to Marduk as companions, as allies that could not be seen but always felt. In the ancient imagination, winds were messengers of gods, spirits moving freely between earth and sky. To wield them was to command the very breath of the cosmos. Marduk's mastery of winds would prove decisive, for chaos was not a fixed creature but a force, shifting and unbounded. Only the winds could match its movement, surrounding and restraining it. Taken together, these weapons form a picture not of brutality but of balance. They do not strike only to destroy. They frame, guide, and direct. The bow aims, the net contains, the winds carry. In mythic rhythm, these gifts show that order does not overcome chaos with force alone. It shapes it, harnesses it, and transforms it. The Enuma Elish lingers on these preparations, almost savoring the moment before the storm breaks. In ritual recitation during the Babylonian New Year festival, this section would have reminded listeners that their world was safeguarded by more than divine decree. It was held together by tools, by symbols of protection. Just as their own city relied on walls, gates, and laws, the universe itself was preserved by the equipment of Marduk. We can pause here to reflect on a simple truth in human life. 2. The weapons we trust are often not swords or shields, but symbols, keys, contracts, prayers, and words. These are the tools by which order is made visible. They are not sharp or cruel, but steady, binding, and clear. Perhaps this is why the myth lingers not on the clash itself, but on the equipping of the champion. The preparation becomes a reassurance, the presence of guardianship in the face of uncertainty. For the dreaming mind, these images drift softly. A bow stretched, not to wound, but to mark direction. A net cast wide across the waters, not to strangle, but to hold. Winds, invisible, wrapping around you like unseen guardians. Each is gentle when imagined at rest, and yet each carries hidden strength. The ancients understood that protection does not always appear as gentleness. Sometimes it takes the form of readiness, of tools placed where they will be needed. In Marduk's arming, we glimpse their understanding of divine preparation. Chaos could not be wished away. It had to be faced, shaped, and held. And so the assembly looked upon their champion, now armed with the bow, the arrows, the net, and the winds. They entrusted to him not only their tools, but their destinies. It was a solemn moment, as if the very balance of heaven and earth had been placed into his keeping. This chapter of the myth ends before the storm begins. It rests on the threshold, with Marduk prepared but not yet moving. For the Babylonians, this moment held comfort. They knew the story that followed, the victory assured. But here, in the stillness, one could breathe in the assurance that order had not abandoned them. Their champion was armed, their protector prepared, and so we are left with a reflection, gentle yet enduring. Protection is not always the absence of danger. Sometimes it is the quiet presence of tools waiting, symbols standing, guardians unseen yet ready. The story closes here with that quiet strength. For even in the greatest storms, there is reassurance in knowing that order has armed itself, that balance has been prepared, and that in the silence before the clash, the universe already leans toward harmony. Chapter 13. The battle begins. Marduk faces Tiamat. The air was tense, though it was not air as we know it. It was the breath of the cosmos, holding still in the moment before collision. Across the endless waters of eternity, Marduk prepared himself, armed with bow and net, strengthened by the four winds that carried him. He stood not as a lone figure, but as the hope of every god who watched in silence. And opposite him rose Tiamat. She was no longer the quiet sea of beginnings. She towered like a horizon without end, her body swelling with the fullness of primordial waters. To the Babylonians, she was not merely a creature, but the embodiment of chaos itself, an ocean unbounded, a darkness unmeasured, a mother whose grief had turned into wrath. The stage of their meeting was not a battlefield as mortals might imagine. There were no armies drawn in rows, no earth beneath their feet. It was the infinite sea, limitless and restless, where sky and water blurred into one another. Here, order and chaos would meet. Marduk raised his bow. It was not the gesture of a hunter, but of one who sets intention. The string was drawn tight, holding in it the tension of the cosmos. Every god who had feared Tiamat placed their trust in that motion. For if the arrow flew true, order might take form. If it faltered, the universe would dissolve back into formless night. Tiamat surged, her voice like thunder across waters. From her came storms, venom, and flame. She released the monsters she had birthed: dragons, serpents, and scorpion, men creatures of fear, hybrid and unformed. Yet Marduk was not shaken. He cast his net wide, stretching it across the deep, so that when she rushed forward, her movements tangled. The winds struck then, invisible yet relentless. They filled Tiamat's mouth, forcing her open, silencing her roar. In this image, the ancients captured something profound: the breath of the world. The unseen current of air was stronger than the flood. Wind divided the waters. It carried Marduk where he willed to go, and it weakened the endless strength of the sea. With his bow drawn, he released the arrow. It flew straight into her open body, piercing her heart. The chaos that had surged now trembled. Her vastness shuddered. The waters that seemed without end were suddenly broken by a line, a wound that marked division. But Marduk did not stop there. He pressed forward, cutting her body in two, splitting sea from sea. One half he lifted upward, and from it he stretched the heavens. The other half he pressed downward, and from it he formed the earth. Here, in this act, the Babylonians found their world's beginning. The sky and the land, the realms above and below, these were not accidents. They were shaped by the struggle of the champion against chaos. Creation, in their telling, was not gentle. It was born in confrontation, in the binding of disorder. The myth does not linger on triumph as a shout of victory. Instead, it moves with ritual calm, as though the act were necessary, inevitable. Marduk had faced the sea, and from that meeting, boundaries emerged. The infinite was made finite. The formless was given form. For those who recited the Enuma Elish during the New Year festival, this story was not only cosmic history, it was renewal. Each year, as the people faced uncertainty floods, drought, war, they reimagined Marduk's battle. They remembered that order had triumphed once and must triumph again. To them, the story was reassurance. The world rests on the victory of structure over chaos, of clarity over confusion. And yet, beneath this, a mystery lingers. Was chaos truly destroyed, or only contained? Tiamat's body was divided, but her essence remained. The sky above, the land beneath, both were born from her. Even in defeat, she remained the very fabric of creation. In this way, the Babylonians acknowledged a subtle truth. Chaos is not only threat, but foundation. Without it, there is nothing to order. When you picture this scene, do not imagine a violent clash of sword against flesh. Think instead of vast forces circling one another. The sea rising, the winds pressing back, the bow releasing, the arrow flying, a line cutting through what seemed endless. It is not the noise of battle, but the rhythm of creation. A meeting of opposites, shaping the world through their tension. There is something profoundly human in this story. For, in our lives, too, order is born from struggle. Clarity arises only when confusion is faced. Boundaries are drawn only when uncertainty presses against them. The myth reminds us that chaos is not simply to be feared, but engaged with. For from it comes the very possibility of life. The Babylonians knew this, though they clothed it in the grandeur of gods. They looked to Marduk and saw in him the courage to face the unknown. They looked to Tiamat and recognized the depths of fear, grief, and fury that reside in the beginnings of all things. Together, their meeting explained why the world is as it is, shaped, divided, yet always resting on waters that remember their source. And so the story of the battle ends not with the disappearance of Tiamat, but with her transformation. She remains not as threat but as structure, her body stretched into sky and earth. Chaos, contained, becomes the frame in which life can grow. The myth whispers of a balance hidden within struggle, that what we fear may also be what sustains us. that what resists us may also give us form, and that, perhaps, even the fiercest storms carry within them the seeds of stillness. In this way, the Babylonians could rest after hearing the story, for if the world was born in conflict, it was also secured in resolution. The waters had been tamed, the heavens established, the land prepared, and within that ordered space, life could take its place. The image lingers, Marduk standing, bow lowered, winds still at his side. Tiamat, vast and divided, no longer surging but spread across the cosmos. The gods above watching in silence, the assembly restored to calm. And for the listener, a final reflection remains. If even the gods themselves required struggle to bring forth order, might not our own struggles hold meaning too? Might the chaos we resist be the very material that shapes the world we are building? The story leaves this question unanswered. It does not instruct, but suggests. It allows the listener to drift with the thought, gentle and unhurried, as though carried by winds across calm waters. Chapter 14. The Net and the Arrow. Tiamat falls. The ancient story tells us that the confrontation reached its turning point when Marduk, the young champion of the gods, cast his net. This was no ordinary snare, but a cosmic trap woven from divine command, stretched wide enough to bind the boundless. With it, he caught Tiamat, the mother of chaos, who had risen like a sea without end. Once held, he drew back his bow, and an arrow, sharpened by the very will of order, pierced her heart. The sea grew still. The great waters, which once raged and threatened to unmake all, were subdued. At first, it may sound like a tale of violence, the slaying of one being by another. Yet, in the Mesopotamian imagination, this moment was not told as senseless destruction. It was a turning, a shift in rhythm. The vast body of Tiamat did not vanish. It lay silent, immense and enduring. And from that silence, the world itself was prepared to take shape. Chaos was not erased, but transformed, given form and structure by the victorious hand of Marduk. The net, the arrow, the heart of Tiamat. These images endure as symbols. To the Babylonians, they marked the passage from disorder to harmony. The net was the boundary, a reminder that even the wildest forces could be contained within limits. The arrow was the act of decision, the strike that defined one state from another. Together, they revealed how order was not born from nothing, but carved out of chaos itself. Creation needed both the storming sea and the steady hand that calmed it. In the Enuma Elish, the epic where this story survives, the tone is solemn. Marduk's victory is celebrated, but it is also regarded with gravity. He is declared king among the gods, given titles of dominion. Yet the emphasis lingers not just on triumph, but on what follows. For after the battle, Marduk does not discard the body of Tiamat. He divides it, arranges it, makes use of it. Her defeat becomes the substance of the cosmos, the heavens, the earth, the rivers, the winds. This detail reveals something profound about Mesopotamian thought. For them, creation was not conjured from emptiness. It was the ordering of what already existed. Tiamat was chaos, but she was also the raw material of existence. In her fall, she gave herself over to a new form. The heavens stretched from her body, the land laid out from her remains. The boundaries of the sea, the courses of the rivers, the paths of the windsoar were traced from her vastness. Seen this way, her death was not an ending, but a transformation. The stillness after her fall was not silence alone, but the deep hush before a new order arises. One can imagine it as the moment when storm-tossed waters suddenly calm, when waves that seemed endless soften into ripples, when the air clears after a night of thunder. In that quiet, the seeds of creation settle, waiting to grow. For the listener today, these images can be held without harshness. They are not weapons in the sense of cruelty, but instruments of shaping. The net is not merely a trap. It is a frame, a way of drawing boundaries in a world that feels too vast. The arrow is not only a wound. It is the clarity of choice, the direction that allows new paths to unfold. And Tiamat herself is not diminished by her fall. She remains the source, the mother whose body became the world. This story invites reflection. How often in human life is chaos met not by erasure, but by transformation? Storms of feeling, floods of change, moments of confusion, these do not disappear when order arrives. Instead, they are reshaped, integrated into something new. What was once overwhelming becomes the foundation for growth. The myth of Tiamat falling to Marduk is not only a tale of gods, but a mirror of this truth. Archaeologists and historians remind us that the Babylonians lived in a land where rivers ruled life. The Tigris and the Euphrates could flood unpredictably, both nourishing and destroying. To a people shaped by waters, the image of Tiamat as the endless sea carried deep meaning. She was life and threat together, fertile yet untamed. Marduk's victory over her was not about cruelty, but about balance, about giving form to the formless, securing a world where life could endure. One might wonder, was Tiamat truly defeated, or was she preserved in another way? After all, if her body became the heavens and the earth, then she remains all around. Each breath of wind, each drop of water, each horizon stretched across the sky still bears her presence. In this telling, she is not gone, but transformed into the very frame of existence. Her chaos remains, but subdued, ordered, held within boundaries that make life possible. The myth, then, is less about destruction than it is about reconciliation. The storm becomes calm, the flood becomes a river, the sea becomes a boundary that gives meaning to land. The arrow in Tiamat's heart is not the end of her, but the moment her vastness could be shaped into something new. As the story closes on this scene, the world stands on the threshold of creation. The stillness that follows the fall is heavy with potential. Out of the body of chaos, mountains will rise, skies will stretch, and waters will find their courses. In the hush, the first order of the cosmos is about to take form, and in that pause, one can linger for a moment longer, to wonder if even chaos itself desires to be given shape, if the vastness longs to be known, and if every storm, in its ending, is already whispering the beginnings of a new world. Chapter 15. The division of Tiamat, heaven and earth shaped. After the storm had stilled, after the net was cast and the arrow struck true, Marduk stood before the vast, silent body of Tiamat. Chaos no longer raged, yet it remained present, stretched before him as raw material. In this immense form, the young god saw not ruin, but possibility. With deliberate care, he took hold of her body and began to divide it. One half, lifted upward, he stretched across the heights, creating the dome of heaven. The other, set downward, became the foundation of the earth. This act of division was more than an act of power. It was the very shaping of existence. For the Babylonians, heaven and earth were not abstract ideas. They were tangible realms, both born from the same source, separated by divine command. The sky was not empty space, but a vault holding back waters above. The earth was not solid matter alone, but a structured domain, bounded and measured, and both rested upon the body of Tiamat, the mother of chaos transformed into the framework of creation. In this story, we find a profound vision of the world. Creation is not described as arising from nothing, as later traditions might suggest. Instead, it is the ordering of what already existed. Chaos, embodied by Tiamat, was not discarded but reshaped. From her unbounded waters, the duality of heaven and earth emerged. This is a theme found across many mythologies, that life depends on separation, on boundaries drawn from the formless. Light must be set apart from darkness, sky divided from sea, order distinguished from disorder. For the Babylonians, the division of Tiamat revealed a cosmic truth that creation itself required sacrifice. The universe was built upon the transformation of something ancient, something vast and untamed. Tiamat's fall was not her erasure, but her offering. In her body, torn and arranged, lay the possibility of life, structure, and meaning. The very world beneath their feet and the sky stretched overhead were reminders of this first sacrifice. The priests who recited the Enuma Elish during the New Year festival would have spoken these lines with solemn gravity. As the community gathered to mark renewal, the myth was not a distant tale, but a reenactment of creation itself. In retelling how heaven and earth were shaped, they affirmed that order continued to hold. The world, resting on the division of chaos, was stable yet ever in need of reaffirmation. By chanting the story, they kept balance alive. Consider the image of Tiamat's body, spread across the cosmos. One half arched upward, becoming the heavens, like an immense canopy stretched taut. The other lay beneath, firm and steady, grounding all things. Between them was the space of life, the world of humans, animals, plants, and gods. Existence itself was framed by her sacrifice, enclosed between her divided halves. Even in silence, she remained present, her being transformed into the architecture of reality. This vision shaped Babylonian thought. The heavens above were not merely a place for stars, but the upper realm of waters and divine order. The earth below was not random terrain, but the appointed dwelling place of life. The two together, divided yet connected, reflected the delicate balance of creation. To live in this world was to dwell within the body of the primordial mother, whose chaos had been subdued but never fully absent. There is a quiet depth in this idea, that even endings may give rise to beginnings. That from the fall of Tiamat, the very structure of life unfolded. Her death was not annihilation, but transformation. One can almost hear in this myth a whispering reassurance that what feels like loss may also be the ground for renewal, that out of what is broken, something enduring can be shaped. This theme of division bringing forth creation echoes in other traditions as well. In Egypt, the sky goddess Nut was arched over the earth god Geb, their bodies separated to allow space for life. In the Hebrew tradition, the waters above were divided from the waters below, a firmament placed between. The motif is widespread, perhaps because ancient peoples recognized that the act of creation requires boundaries, requires distinctions. Without separation, there can be no form. Without division, there is no world to inhabit. Yet the Babylonian telling holds its own unique texture. Here, creation is not the gentle act of a craftsman, but the decisive shaping of what was once threatening. Tiamat was chaos, vast and devouring, but in Marduk's hands, her threat became foundation. Even the most fearsome force could become the structure of life when given form. This was not the erasure of chaos, but its transformation into order. The myth invites reflection on the nature of beginnings. Must every creation arise from a kind of ending? Must new order always be born from what came before? Perhaps it is so. In human life, as in myth, moments of transformation often emerge from loss, from the breaking of what once seemed unshakable. The story of Tiamat reminds us that such endings need not mean emptiness. They may, instead, hold the material of a new life. The Babylonians looked upward and saw heaven as the stretched body of Tiamat. They looked downward and felt earth beneath their feet, also her form. They walked in a world built upon her transformation. Even chaos, once subdued, was never truly absent. It lived on in the structure of things, reminding them that life itself was born of tension between order and disorder. In the hush of this story, the image becomes gentle, not of a slain monster, but of a vast being who gave herself over to the making of the world. Her presence lingers in every horizon, in every shift of sky and earth, and perhaps when one pauses beneath the stars or rests upon the ground, there is still a sense of dwelling within her, within the body of chaos that became creation. The division of Tiamat is the first architecture, the blueprint of existence. Heaven above, earth below, life between. From her body, the cosmos gained shape. And in that shaping, a truth was told. That order is born not by destroying chaos, but by giving it form. That what once threatened can become the very frame of life. And so the myth closes softly on this moment. The heavens stretched, the earth firmed, the world poised to unfold. In the stillness after division, one may wonder, does chaos ever truly vanish, or does it always live on, hidden in the foundations of order, waiting to be remembered? Chapter 16. The ordering of the skies, stars, and seasons set in place. With heaven and earth shaped from Tiamat's divided body, the world was no longer a void of unformed waters. Yet it was still incomplete. A cosmos needs not only structure, but rhythm. Without rhythm, life drifts without measure, events fall without pattern, and existence has no steady ground to walk upon. Marduk, now sovereign among the gods, turned his gaze upward. The heavens, stretched from the Sea Mother's form, were vast and weightin. It was there, in the endless arch above, that he set the order of the skies. The Babylonians imagined that Marduk placed constellations in the heavens as stations for the gods. Each deity had its appointed sign, its place in the firmament. Stars were not distant fires, nor random sparks scattered across the night. They were the visible footprints of the divine, arranged in deliberate patterns. To look up at the stars was to glimpse the order of the heavens, a reflection of divine governance. The sky was like a great map, traced with meaning, guiding both gods and humans alike. Among these stars, the moon was appointed a special role. Marduk fixed its path and gave it the task of measuring time. In Babylonian thought, the moon was the keeper of months, waxing and waning with faithful rhythm. Its phases divided the passage of days, marking the progression of time in cycles. With each return of its light, the moon brought assurance that the cosmos still held together. Life was tethered to its silent orbit, bound by its shining rhythm. The sun, too, was set in place. Its rising and setting drew the line between day and night, granting balance to the cycle of existence. Light and shadow were no longer arbitrary. They came in ordered sequence, predictable and steady. The journey of the sun traced the path of days, its heat nurturing life, its absence allowing rest. Together with the moon, it gave humanity a dependable rhythm, one of labor and renewal, of waking and sleeping, of sowing and harvesting, beyond the daily and monthly cycles. Marduk also fixed the greater order of seasons. By arranging the constellations, he marked the turning points of the year. The Babylonians saw in the heavens signs of planting and reaping, of flooding and retreat, of summer's heat and winter's rest. The stars were not only symbols of divine presence, but guides for survival. Agriculture, the foundation of civilization, was written in the sky. The heavens became the great calendar, holding the knowledge of when to sow, when to harvest, when to prepare for flood or drought. To the Babylonians, this ordering of the skies was one of the greatest assurances of divine care. The chaos of Tiamat had been subdued, but it was not enough to merely create land and sky. Life needed a rhythm, a pattern that gave security against the unpredictable. The constellations and celestial cycles were proof that the world was not drifting in chance. It was governed by order, by the steady hand of Marduk. This sense of order extended beyond practical survival. It shaped how they thought of life itself. Existence was patterned, like the heavens. Just as stars returned in their season, so too did the cycles of human life. Birth, growth, decline, and death were not random happenings, but part of the same order that governed the skies. The cosmic pattern was mirrored in the human story. To live was to participate in these rhythms, to find one's place within the great constellation of being. There is a calmness in this vision. To imagine the sky as carefully arranged, each star placed with intention, each cycle entrusted with purpose. Even in a world full of uncertainty, the heavens whispered of stability. When the moon waxed again, when the sun rose once more, when the constellations returned to their stations, it was as if the cosmos itself was saying, all is still in order. For the priests and astronomers of Babylon, this divine order became a lifelong study. The movements of the heavens were charted, recorded on clay tablets, measured with care. Astronomy was not separate from theology. It was theology made visible. To trace the path of the stars was to read the writing of the gods. The constellations were sacred text, their movements, messages, their rhythms, assurances that Marduk's victory still endured. The Enuma Elish captures this moment with a certain quiet awe. After the storm of Tiamat, after the violent clash of chaos and order, the myth turns to the calm arrangement of stars and seasons. It is as though the cosmos itself sighed, settling into its new rhythm. The tumult was over, and the steady breathing of time began. One can imagine the recitation of these lines during the festival, lulling the gathered people into a sense of reassurance that they lived in a world not ruled by chaos, but by dependable cycles. Reflect for a moment on this ordering. To place the moon in its orbit, to fix the sun in its course, to align the stars in their constellations, this was to give the cosmos a heartbeat. Without these rhythms, life drifts but with them, existence becomes livable, predictable, even comforting. Perhaps that is why ancient peoples looked so often to the heavens. They were not only curious about the stars, but longing for signs of order, for proof that their world was stable. And what does it mean, even for us, to live under such a sky? When we watch the moon wax and wane, when we see constellations return with the seasons, do we not also feel the quiet pull of continuity? The same stars that guided the Babylonians still guide us. The same rhythms that marked their fields and temples still measure our nights and years. The myth speaks across millennia, reminding us that order has always been sought in the heavens. The Babylonians knew the comfort of this cosmic order. They walked beneath a sky arranged with care, each light holding its place, each cycle keeping its promise. To them, it was evidence that chaos could be transformed into rhythm, that the universe was not only vast but meaningful. The stars were not scattered accidents. They were guides, companions, reminders of divine order. In the hush of this myth, the image becomes gentle. The constellations do not blaze in violence. They glow softly, like lanterns placed to guide the night. The moon does not command, but keeps steady watch. The sun rises faithfully, never failing, never forgetting its course. Together, they cradle life in a rhythm both firm and kind. The story closes here in quiet assurance. Heaven is ordered, time is measured, cycles are set. The chaos of the waters has become the rhythm of days. As stars find their places in the sky, so too may thoughts find their constellations. And in that stillness, as the cosmos breathes in steady cycles, one may wonder, is order itself a kind of lullaby sung by the heavens to all who dwell beneath them? Chapter 17. The Tablet of Destinies restored to order in the heart of the Babylonian imagination. No object carried greater weight than the Tablet of Destinies. Upon it, the very course of all things was inscribed. To hold it was not simply to rule over gods and mortals, but to command the unfolding of time itself. Earlier, Tiamat had placed it into the hands of Kingu, her chosen commander. In his grasp, it became a symbol of rebellion destiny claimed by the forces of chaos. Yet once Marduk rose victorious, he seized the tablet back, and with that single act, the balance of the cosmos was restored. The Tablet of Destinies was no mere ornament in myth. It embodied the idea that fate could be written, held, and carried. The Babylonians did not see destiny as random or shifting, but as something fixed in divine law. To imagine the cosmos was to imagine order inscribed, every motion of stars, every flood of the river, every rise and fall of kings already marked upon the invisible record of being. When Kingu bore it, chaos seemed to challenge this law. When Marduk reclaimed it, the cosmos found its anchor once more. For the Babylonians, this moment was more than a mythic scene. It was a reassurance. Life in Mesopotamia was shaped by both abundance and fragility. The Tigris and Euphrates could bless with fertile floods, or destroy with violent torrents. Empires rose, then fell into dust. Yet the myth whispered that behind all this shifting, destiny itself was stable. The universe was not unraveling. It moved according to laws that the gods themselves upheld. The tablet symbolized this certainty in religious rituals. This symbol was reflected in the keeping of omens, in the reading of stars, in the structuring of law codes. To inscribe on clay tablets was to imitate, in small form, the divine act of inscribing destiny itself. Kings in Babylon often associated their rule with divine sanction, suggesting that their decrees reflected the deeper pattern fixed in the heavens. The idea of destiny inscribed, guarded, and restored shaped not only myth, but the very way society understood its order. There is something deeply human in this longing, to believe that events, however difficult, are not without shape, to trust that existence has a pattern, even when it feels uncertain. Perhaps that is why the myth lingers with such power. When Marduk seizes the Tablet of Destinies, he is not only defeating an enemy, he is calming a fear that life might be left unanchored, subject only to chance. The myth tells us instead that destiny has a keeper, and that the laws of the cosmos remain firm. Consider for a moment the quiet symbolism. A tablet solid, durable, enduring. Upon it, writing marks that fix thought into permanence. To the ancient listener, this was the essence of stability. The word was no longer fleeting breath, but carved sin. To extend this image into the realm of destiny was to believe that even fate itself was not fluid, but written. The stars might seem distant, the floods might come and go, but behind them was the steady hand of inscription. When Marduk held the tablet, he did not keep it as a personal treasure. He restored it to its rightful place, under the governance of order. In this act, the myth reflects a subtle truth. Power is not secure unless it is rooted in structure. Chaos may seize symbols of authority, but unless they are aligned with deeper order, they cannot endure. By returning the tablet of destinies to cosmic law, Marduk ensured that creation itself would hold together. The Babylonians saw destiny not as an endless series of surprises, but as something flowing along a course. Yet this was not meant to diminish human life into helplessness. To live within a divinely ordered cosmos was to walk upon steady ground. One might not change the course of rivers or the paths of stars, but one could take comfort in knowing they had a path at all. The unpredictability of the moment was tempered by the greater certainty of pattern, and perhaps that is why the myth still speaks. In our own lives, uncertainty presses in. Choices feel heavy, events seem random, change often unsettles. Yet the story suggests a gentle reflection. Beneath the surface drift, there may still be a current, unseen but steady. Like the tablet of destinies hidden in the hand of the divine, order moves quietly beneath chaos. Even if we cannot read its inscription, it may still be written. The image closes softly. Marduk, champion of the gods, holds in his hands the record of all that will be. Chaos has been subdued, and destiny returned to order. The heavens keep their cycles, the earth finds its balance, the waters flow according to measure. For the Babylonians, this was the ultimate reassurance that fate was not abandoned to chance, but guided by law. For us, it becomes a quiet reminder that even when life feels uncertain, the universe may still move according to patterns deeper than we can see than so. In the silence of this myth, the tablet rests once more in its rightful place. The laws of the cosmos hold. The constellations trace their stations. Time unfolds with rhythm, and the heart is left to wonder if destiny is indeed inscribed. Are we not always walking across words we cannot yet read, carried by the unseen script of the divine? Chapter 18. Kingu's fate, blood of the first man. Kingu had been the favored of Tiamat. Chosen by the Sea Mother, he was given the tablet of destinies and made commander of her forces. In him, chaos had placed its trust. But when Marduk triumphed and order prevailed, Kingu's fate was sealed. Captured and condemned, he became the unwilling source of something entirely new. From his blood, mingled with the clay of the earth, the god Ea shaped the first human beings. This moment in the Babylonian creation myth carries a weight unlike any other. It is the crossing point between the struggles of gods and the existence of humankind. What had been a war among the divine now gave way to a world where mortals would take their place. The substance of Kingu's life, once bound to rebellion, became the seed of human flesh. In this act, humanity was not born of pure divinity, nor solely of earth, but of both, blood and clay, spirit and soil. For the Babylonians, This mixture explained much about the human condition. To be alive was to be pulled between heaviness and transcendence. Clay tethered humanity to the dust, the ground beneath their feet. But divine blood gave life a spark beyond mere matter. This duality was not romanticized. It was practical, even sobering. Humans were created for a purpose, to bear the burdens of the gods. They would till the earth, offer sacrifice, build temples, and maintain the rhythms of creation so that the divine realm could rest. This was no small responsibility. In the ancient worldview, labor was sacred. The rising of crops, the tending of herds, the rituals offered at dawn and dusk, these were not mundane tasks. They were part of holding the cosmos together. Without human care, the gods would once again be troubled. Without service, order might weaken, and chaos return. Humanity's role, then, was not exalted as in later traditions that spoke of mankind ruling over creation. Here, mankind was a servant, a caretaker, a worker whose life was woven into the fabric of cosmic duty. And yet, beneath this weight lies a subtler truth. To be made of both clay and divine blood is also to belong. It means that humanity is not an afterthought, but a living bridge between worlds. The Babylonians could see themselves reflected in this story, fragile, dependent on the rivers, yet connected to divine purpose. To live was to serve, but also to share in the eternal story written by the gods themselves. This idea of creation through sacrifice appears in many traditions. In Norse mythology, the world is formed from the body of Ymir, a primeval giant. In Vedic hymns, the cosmic man Purusha is divided to shape the universe. The Babylonians placed this pattern not only in the shaping of heavens and earth, but in the very making of human beings. Life came from death, order from bloodshed. The price of creation was always paid in sacrifice. Kingu's fate embodies this principle with striking clarity. For the listener in ancient Babylon, this story gave meaning to the endless toil of life. Farming under the Mesopotamian sun, maintaining irrigation canals, shaping bricks for temple walls. These labors were not merely survival. They were the very reason humanity had been brought into being. Work was written into the essence of man from the beginning. To resist it would be to resist one's place in the cosmic order, but to embrace it was to align with the will of the gods. There is a quiet kind of comfort in such a vision. If one's struggles and efforts are part of the divine design, then no task is without purpose. Even the smallest act of tending the earth can be seen as echoing the first covenant between gods and men. Humanity's origin in Kingu's blood means that even toil is sacred, woven into the mystery of creation itself. And yet, reflection stirs. What does it mean that mankind's beginning rests on the blood of a defeated being? Is humanity forever tied to the memory of rebellion and judgment? Or is it that even the remnants of chaos can be turned toward life? The myth does not resolve these questions. Instead, it leaves them lingering. Like stars that guide without ever descending to earth, anthropological lie. This myth reveals how the Babylonians understood themselves. They did not imagine human beings as masters of nature, but as participants in its maintenance. The gods set the cycles, but humans kept them running. The image of mixing blood with clay also reflects the centrality of Earth itself in Mesopotamian life. Clay was everywhere, shaping homes, forming tablets, lining canals. To say that man was made of clay was not abstract poetry. It was a recognition that human life was as ordinary and grounded as the material they touched daily. But mingled with this ordinary earth was something extraordinary, the spark of divine essence. This duality remains striking. To work with soil, to sweat, to labor, yet to know that one's very blood is touched by the divine. The myth suggests that in every humble act, a trace of eternal purpose lingers. The Babylonians lived with the awareness that their lives were borrowed from the struggle of gods, their service bound up with cosmic necessity. But this awareness also offered identity. Humanity was not rootless. It had origin, meaning, and place. In the quiet of night, the story softens. To think of oneself as formed from both blood and earth is to feel the weight of connection. One belongs to the ground that sustains, but also to the deeper mystery that moves through all things. Perhaps this is why the story has endured. It tells us that humanity is not merely laboring dust, nor merely fleeting spirit, but both bound, blended, inseparable. And so, Kingu's fate was sealed not only in defeat, but in transformation. His blood, once carried in rebellion, became the wellspring of all human life. Through him, chaos was reshaped into service, and death gave way to new beginnings. The Babylonians, gazing at their fields or lifting their offerings to the sky, would have known themselves as part of this eternal exchange. Life drawn from sacrifice, duty drawn from destiny, clay and blood mingled into being. For us, the myth carries a gentle reminder that even struggle, even endings, may hold within them the seed of new creation, that humanity itself flows from both the fragility of earth and the endurance of spirit. And perhaps it invites a question that lingers quietly in the heart. If our very blood is mingled with the remnants of the divine, then in every act of labor, are we not already part of a story older than memory, older than the stars themselves? Chapter 19. The Temple of Esagila, dwelling for the gods. When Marduk's victory was complete, when chaos had been subdued and the heavens and earth set in place, the gods looked upon him as their champion. To honor him and to establish a permanent dwelling for divine presence on earth, they built a temple. This temple stood in Babylon, a city that would rise to become the beating heart of Mesopotamian religion. Esagila was not just a house of worship. It was the earthly reflection of cosmic order, a visible anchor of the myth in stone and clay. In the Enuma Elish, the creation epic, the gods themselves are said to have labored in its construction. They brought forth bricks, laid foundations, and celebrated its rising walls. The imagery conveys more than the building of stone. It shows that once the cosmos was ordered, it needed a center, a sacred space where heaven could touch earth. Esagila was that center. The name Esagila means the house whose top is raised high. This title mirrors the very architecture of Mesopotamian sacred design. Like the ziggurats that towered above the flat plains, Esagila was conceived as a meeting point of above and below. For the Babylonians, temples were not simply buildings but bridges. They connected human labor and divine presence, the dust of earth and the breath of gods. Historically, Esagila was part of a greater temple complex in Babylon. Nearby rose the ziggurat Etemenanki, often associated with the biblical Tower of Babel. These structures were layered with meaning. Each level represented stages of the cosmos, the underworld, the earthly realm, and the heavens. By ascending them, priests symbolically retraced the ordering of creation, moving closer to the dwelling of the divine. Esagila, as the central temple, was the house where the gods could rest, feasted with offerings, honored with ritual, and sustained by human devotion. The building of Asagia also marked a profound shift. The creation story that began with tumultuous waters and celestial battles now found its resolution in ritual and community. What had once been mythic combat was now remembered in festival. The New Year celebrations in Babylon, known as Akitu, were rooted in this narrative. During these days, the recitation of the Enuma Elish reaffirmed Marduk's victory, and processions carried his statue between temples. Isagila stood at the heart of these events, a stage where the myth was reenacted not in words alone, but in living ceremony. For the Babylonians, entering Esagila was not simply a religious act. It was to step into the story itself. The temple embodied the cosmic order, and those who offered prayers or sacrifices within its walls aligned themselves with that order. The dust of the streets ended at its gates, but inside was a microcosm of the universe. Candles flickered like stars. Priestly chants echoed like the wind across the heavens. The fragrance of incense rose like the breath of creation itself. From an anthropological view, Isagila demonstrates how myths become rooted in place. The Babylonian imagination did not leave creation floating in the past. Instead, it embedded the story into the city itself. Every brick laid, every altar stone, every ritual performance drew the cosmic drama into human life. The temple was more than an image of divine dwelling. It was the assurance that order, once won, could be maintained through devotion, and yet, beyond the historical and the ritual, the temple offers something deeper to consider. To envision Isagila is to see how humanity has always sought a center, a sacred point where the vastness of existence feels grounded. The Babylonians raised it in brick and stone, but perhaps it is also true that each person carries such a space within, an inner sanctuary, where chaos is quieted and order is remembered. To think of Asagila in this way is to shift from outer to inner vision. The temple is not only a house for the gods, but a symbol of rest within the human spirit. Just as the myth moved from storm and battle to sanctuary and stillness, so too might one find within the heart, a place where creation's noise becomes calm. The story of Esagila is a reminder that sacredness often takes form through rhythm, the daily tending of altars, the seasonal cycle of festivals. The repetition of prayers, all of these mirrored the order set in place by Marduk. Repetition was not dull routine, but reassurance, a way to keep chaos at bay. In the same manner, the rhythms of daily life, when attended with care, can become a kind of personal ritual. The quiet moments at dawn, the shared meal, the reflection before sleep, all can echo the ancient work of building a temple within. Isagila endured for centuries as Babylon rose and fell, as empires shifted, as languages changed. Its walls eventually crumbled, but its meaning lingers. To the ancient Babylonians, it was the house where gods dwelt. To us, it can be an image of belonging, a reminder that order is not only something imposed from above, but something cultivated in the spaces we hold sacred. And so, the tale of creation comes to rest here, not in the storm of battle, not in the forging of heavens and earth, but in a dwelling, a temple where gods and humans meet, where myth becomes ritual, and where order becomes a place one can enter. Perhaps it asks us, gently, where is your sanctuary? Where is the space where chaos falls silent, and the presence of the eternal feels near? Chapter 20. The Enuma Elish creation remembered in ritual. In ancient Babylon, creation was not a story told once and then left behind. It was a living rhythm, renewed each year in the pulse of ritual. At the heart of this rhythm was the Akitu festival, the great New Year celebration held each spring. With the first blossoms of barley and the swelling of rivers, the Babylonians gathered to recite the Enuma Elish, the epic of beginnings. The Akitu was no small occasion. It stretched over days, filled with processions, offerings, and symbolic drama. But at its core was the chanting of the creation myth. Priests stood within the temple of Asagila, voices steady and solemn, speaking again of the time when waters mingled, when Tiamat rose in chaos, when Marduk fought and fashioned the world. To hear the Enuma Elish at Akitu was to hear creation happening again, not as distant memory but as present reality. The festival fell in early spring, at the moment when the natural world itself seemed to be reborn. The Tigris and Euphrates swelled with floodwaters, spreading fertility across the fields. Barley sprouted from dark soil. Life returned after the lean months of winter. In this setting, the recitation of the creation epic was not mere myth, but a mirror of nature's renewal. The cosmos itself appeared to awaken, and the story gave voice to that awakening. In the ritual structure of Akitu myth and ceremony intertwined, the king of Babylon played a central role, humbling himself before Marduk's image, confessing his failings, and receiving again the divine mandate to rule. In this drama, the king symbolized humanity as a whole, frail, dependent, and yet renewed by alignment with the cosmic order. His abasement was not humiliation but renewal, a necessary clearing of pride before the cycles of life could turn again. The Enuma Elish, recited aloud, reinforced this renewal. Each word reminded listeners that chaos had been subdued, that order had been established, and that humanity had its place in the grand design. The myth was not only a tale of distant gods, but a reassurance that creation held steady, even when human lives felt uncertain. In a world of floods and droughts, war and shifting empires, the annual return of this ritual was an anchor. It told the Babylonians, the cosmos remains ordered, and you remain part of it. From a historical perspective, this intertwining of myth and ritual illustrates the profound role of storytelling in ancient societies. Myths were not seen as entertainment. They were forces, living patterns that shaped reality. By speaking them, communities believed they were participating in the very structure of the universe. To chant the Enuma Elish was to align the human city with the divine cosmos, to renew both at once. And yet, there is something deeply human in this ritual of repetition. It speaks to a universal need for renewal, for patterns that carry us through the uncertainties of existence. Even outside Babylon, across cultures and centuries, spring has carried rituals of renewal, festivals, sacrifices, and prayers that mark the passage from one cycle to the next. Perhaps the Babylonians, in their Akitu, were not so different from us, seeking reassurance in rhythm, in the steady return of order. To reflect on this today is to see how repetition shapes the human mind. The Enuma Elish recited each year is not unlike the rising of the sun each morning, or the turning of seasons, or even the nightly rhythm of rest and waking. Each cycle carries a reminder that beginnings are never finished, that creation is ongoing. In this sense, ritual becomes less about recalling a single past event and more about entering a pattern that sustains life. The Akitu festival also shows how myth can inhabit community. For the Babylonians, this was not an individual meditation. It was a collective act, binding city and citizen together. The people gathered, the priests chanted, the king humbled himself, and the gods were honored. Through these acts, Babylon itself was renewed. The city was not only a place of bricks and streets, but a living reflection of the cosmos, held together by ritual remembrance. One might imagine the sound of the recitation, voices rising and falling, echoing within temple walls. The chant of creation, steady and solemn, threading through incense, smoke, and the glow of lamps. Outside, the fields awaited planting, the rivers continued their flood, the people prepared for a new year. Inside, in the temple's heart, the myth bound all of these threads together, holding chaos at bay, shaping the year ahead. Anthropologists often note that ritual repetition does more than preserve memory. It creates presence. For the Babylonians, the Enuma Elish was not a tale of something long finished, but a living event made present again. Each word carried power. Each gesture renewed the order of existence. In this way, the Akitu was not only remembrance, but participation. To listen was to stand in the space between chaos and order, as creation was enacted once more. And so, the myth endured, not in silence, but in song. Not on shelves of forgotten clay tablets alone, but in living voices, year after year. Even as Babylon's fortunes rose and fell, the rhythm of ritual carried on, weaving people into the eternal pattern. For the modern listener, the Akitu may seem distant, yet its essence lingers. The comfort of rhythm, the reassurance of cycles, the renewal of beginning again, these remain part of human experience. Perhaps the Babylonians remind us that creation is never a finished act. It unfolds in each season, each dawn, each repetition of words that anchor us. As the Enuma Elish closed, as the festival moved from chant to celebration, the people returned to their lives. Yet they carried with them the assurance that the cosmos remained steady, that the gods dwelt in their temple, and that order, fragile yet enduring, had been renewed once more. And perhaps this leaves a quiet question for us. In what rhythms do we place our trust? Where do we find the rituals that remind us that chaos can give way to order, and that every ending can unfold into a beginning again? Chapter 21. The Cosmic Balance, Order, Chaos, and Eternal Drift. Though Marduk triumphed in the Enuma Elish, the story does not end with the complete destruction of chaos. Tiamat is slain, but she is not erased. Her body, divided and reshaped, becomes the very fabric of creation. From one half, Marduk stretches the dome of the heavens. From the other, he lays the foundation of the earth. Her waters remain, flowing still in rivers and seas. Her presence endures, woven into every stone, every star, every breath of wind. This detail is crucial. It reminds us that for the Babylonians, creation was not a simple story of victory, where one force annihilates another and peace is permanently secured. Instead, it is a story of balance. Chaos remains, but in transformed form, restrained, reshaped, and given a place within the structure of order. Marduk does not banish the storm. He sets boundaries around it, making it part of the cosmos itself. In this, the Babylonians expressed a truth recognized across ancient thought, that the world is never purely calm, nor purely chaotic. Instead, it drifts between the two, carried by tides of opposition that never fully resolve. Order brings structure, but too much rigidity can suffocate. Chaos brings danger, but also possibility. Creation, then, is not conquest, but a harmony of tensions, a weaving together of forces that remain in eternal dialogue. We can see this in their daily lives. Babylon itself, built along the Tigris and Euphrates, depended upon the waters that both sustained and threatened it. The rivers could flood with destructive force, washing away homes and fields. Yet those same floods left behind fertile soil, feeding crops, ensuring survival. The Babylonians lived with this dual truth, that what gives life may also endanger it. To live was to dwell within that balance, not to escape it. Tiamat's enduring presence in creation reflects this understanding. She is not erased because she cannot be. Chaos is not an enemy that disappears forever. It is an element of existence itself. The world rests upon her body. The waters that once threatened now nourish. Even in death, she is part of the structure of life. Marduk's triumph is not the annihilation of chaos, but its transformation. Philosophically, this raises a profound point. If order depends on chaos, then the two are not enemies at all, but partners. The Babylonian myth suggests that stability itself requires the memory of storm. Just as calm seas still hold the depth and power of unseen currents. The sky is stretched from Tiamat's body, yet the waters of her chaos still lap at the edges of the ordered world. This vision shaped how Babylonians approached their lives. Rituals, laws, and kingship were meant to maintain order, but always with the awareness that chaos lingered nearby. Each new year, during the Akitu festival, the creation myth was recited not to boast of order's eternal supremacy, but to re-establish the fragile balance. By chanting the tale, they renewed the cosmic arrangement, ensuring that chaos remained bound but present, always contained, never denied. Anthropologists often note that such myths reflect psychological truths as well. Human life itself is lived in tension between structure and disruption. Too much order can feel suffocating, reducing freedom and possibility. Too much chaos leads to fear and instability. What the Enuma Elish presents is not a fantasy of one permanently overcoming the other, but a reminder that peace lies in holding both together. One might imagine the Babylonians gazing at the night sky, seeing the constellations fixed in place by Marduk, yet also knowing that storms could rise at any time. The heavens appeared steady, but the earth was never far from trembling. They lived in acceptance of this drift, neither despairing at the presence of chaos, nor believing that order was unshakable. Life flowed between the two, like the rivers that defined their world. And so, chaos was not only destructive, but necessary. Without it, there could be no creation. Without Tiamat's waters, there would be no world at all. Her defeat was also her transformation into the material of existence. This is perhaps one of the most remarkable insights of the myth, that even what threatens us may become the very ground we walk upon, the very sky above us. For the listener today, this perspective can carry a quiet comfort. We often long for perfect stability, imagining that peace comes from the absence of difficulty. Yet the Babylonians remind us that peace is not erasure, but balance. Stillness is not found by removing the storm, but by resting within the tension it creates. The river may surge, but its flood also renews the earth. The night may hold shadows, but it also carries the promise of stars. This balance also reflects the rhythm of human experience. Consider sleep itself. Each night is a surrender to a kind of chaos, the dissolution of order, the drifting into dream. Yet from that surrender comes renewal. Waking follows, bringing clarity, structure, and order once more. The cycle is not broken, but balanced. Perhaps the Babylonians, who recited the Enuma Elish each year, understood this rhythm more deeply than we might guess. Scholars sometimes debate whether the Enuma Elish reflects political realities as much as cosmic truths. Marduk's victory and the establishment of order mirrors Babylon's rise as a dominant city. Its claim to organize and govern the wider world. Yet even in politics, chaos was never absent. Rival cities rose, empires fell, floods came and went. In weaving chaos into the very body of creation, the myth acknowledged that instability could never be eliminated, only contained, reshaped, balanced. This is why the myth feels so enduring. It does not offer a false hope of perfection, but an honest acceptance of reality. The world is fragile. Order is precious. Chaos is ever near. And yet, together, they form the fabric of life itself. In the soft light of reflection, this vision can feel strangely calming. To know that chaos is not a failure but a part of creation may ease the pressure we place on ourselves. Life is not meant to be perfectly ordered, free of disturbance. It is meant to hold both currents at once, to drift between calm and storm with patience. And so, Tiamat remains, not as a shadow to fear, but as the ground beneath our feet, the waters that flow, the breath of wind that unsettles but also refreshes. Order remains, not as an absolute, but as a guiding shape, a constellation by which we steer. Between them, life drifts, fragile yet steady, always renewed. Perhaps this is the gentle wisdom, hidden in the Enuma Elish. That peace does not come from winning the battle once and for all, but from learning to dwell within the balance, to accept that creation is never finished, always unfolding between chaos and order. And maybe the deeper question lingers. Still, if the cosmos itself is born of both storm and calm, then might the soul also find its rest not in escape, but in harmony, holding together what seems opposed, and finding stillness in the drift between. Chapter 22. Reflections on Apsu, the forgotten father, in the long story of the Enuma Elish. It is easy to let Apsu slip into the shadows. His name appears early, his presence woven into the opening lines, but once conflict begins, he is quickly cast aside. Tiamat rises as the central figure of chaos. Marduk emerges as the hero of order, and the tale unfolds in their clash. Yet Apsu, the first of the waters, remains a quiet figure, almost forgotten in the grandeur of their struggle. Still, his story lingers, and in its simplicity it carries a different kind of weight. Apsu was the sweet water, the calm abyss beneath the noise of the younger gods. He desired nothing more than silence. His wish was not for conquest, not for glory, not even for change, but for rest. In the opening verses, he is described as being disturbed by the clamor of creation, troubled by the endless stirrings of the younger divine beings. For him, the noise of becoming was too much. He longed to dissolve it, to return everything to stillness. In this way, Apsu becomes an unusual figure. He is not the violent chaos of Tiamat, nor the organizing power of Marduk. Instead, he represents a yearning that feels profoundly human, the wish for quiet. The Babylonians, who lived in bustling cities surrounded by the roar of rivers, the cry of marketplaces, and the demands of empire, surely knew this longing as well. Beneath the rhythm of festivals and the weight of duty, there is always the ancient pull toward silence, a desire to let the waters cover everything again, to rest in peace without disturbance. From an anthropological perspective, Apsu embodies what some traditions call primordial rest. In Mesopotamian thought, as in many mythologies, the world begins not with noise, but with silence, with waters unbroken, a stillness before form. Apsu is that stillness. He is not destroyed so much as absorbed into the background of existence. His waters do not vanish. They sink below, becoming the abyss upon which all creation floats. And so, though the Enuma Elish moves on to battles, destinies, temples, and festivals, Apsu remains beneath it all. His story becomes hidden but not lost. He represents the return at the end of all things, the great quiet into which creation may one day dissolve. For the Babylonians, who lived with constant awareness of cycles, of floods, of planting, of death and renewal, Apsu could serve as a reminder that silence was not only before, but also beyond. His yearning speaks across time. Who has not, in moments of weariness, wished for a world without clamor? Who has not longed for a rest untouched by demand, by duty, by expectation? The figure of Apsu, though framed in myth, whispers to that part of the human soul that seeks not more but less noise, less struggle, less division. His is the call of the abyss, not in terror, but in calm. Scholars often focus on Marduk's triumph as the centerpiece of the creation epic, yet in doing so, they sometimes miss how the myth frames its beginning. Creation rises from silence, is disturbed by movement, and returns, in the end, to silence again. The story is circular. It begins with the still waters of Apsu and Tiamat together, and even after the ordering of the cosmos, it leans back toward that same rest. Apsu, though forgotten in narrative, endures in meaning. The Babylonians may not have honored him with temples as they did Marduk, yet his presence lived in the abyssal waters beneath the earth, in the deep wells, in the quiet spaces that stretched beyond the reach of human control. He was not a god to be celebrated with song, but a force to be acknowledged with reverence, the silence beneath sound, the night beneath day, the rest beneath movement. This interpretation also suggests why Apsu's story feels strangely comforting. In a myth filled with battles and cosmic upheaval, his wish for quiet stands apart. It is not heroic in the usual sense, yet it reflects something universal. All creation may crave silence eventually. Just as rivers return to the sea, so all things may drift back into the abyss, the great stillness from which they began. For the listener tonight, there is a gentle invitation here to recognize that rest is not an absence, but a presence. Apsu's silence is not emptiness, but fullness, a depth that holds everything quietly. To drift toward that silence is not to lose oneself, but to be carried back into the ancient waters that cradle all being. In the grandeur of Marduk's order, Apsu becomes the overlooked figure, but in quiet reflection, he becomes central once again. He is the bookend of creation, the forgotten father whose longing shapes the beginning and the end. He does not conquer, and he is not celebrated, yet his silence is the ground of everything. Perhaps this is the hidden wisdom of his story, that creation is not only about sound and structure, but also about return. That silence waits beneath the noise, steady and eternal, and that, in surrendering to it, one does not fall into nothingness, but into rest. And so, as the myth closes its circle, the listener is reminded of the same truth. All noise, all striving, all motion will eventually settle. The waters will grow calm again. Apsu's longing is fulfilled not in destruction, but in the eternal rest that waits quietly beneath all things. And maybe, as the night deepens, this silence can be felt even now, a reminder that beyond the world's clamor lies the quiet waters, waiting, steady and still. Chapter 23. Echoes across time from Babylon to now. The story of the Enuma Elish does not end in Babylon. Though written in the language of the Babylonians, etched on clay tablets and recited in their spring festivals, its rhythms have flowed far beyond the walls of their cities. Myths do not remain bound to the people who first told them. They drift, like rivers branching into new lands, reshaping themselves in every culture that receives them, from the clay banks of the Euphrates. Echoes of this creation story reached Canaan. There, tales of a sea dragon subdued by a storm god began to appear in the mythology of neighboring peoples. In Ugaritic texts, the god bull battles the sea god Yam and the serpent Lotan. The resemblance is striking chaos, taking the form of the waters, order secured by the victory of the divine warrior. The names change, the setting shifts, but the theme remains. Behind the story of Baal and Yam lies the shadow of Tiamat and Marduk, the resonance carried further still. In the Hebrew scriptures, fragments of this ancient conflict can be heard. The book of Job speaks of Leviathan, the twisting serpent subdued by God. The Psalms recall the sea being rebuked, the deep waters split apart. Isaiah echoes the theme again, describing the Lord slaying the dragon of the sea. These are not direct retellings of Babylon's myth, but they carry its memory, transformed through new theology, reshaped to speak of one God rather than many. What was once Marduk's triumph becomes, in Hebrew hands, the act of the Most High, who stills chaos and establishes order. Later, in Greek thought, the echoes surface again. Philosophers wrestled with the same duality of order and disorder, form and formlessness. They used new language, cosmos and chaos, yet the question was the same. How does structure arise from the unshaped? What holds the universe in balance? In their reasoning, we hear the same old concern, expressed in different words. Yet tracing back to those first Babylonian chants, even beyond philosophy, the imagery endured. Early Christian writers, inheriting both Hebrew scripture and Greco-Roman thought, spoke of creation as an ordering of chaos by divine word. In their vision, the sea again became a symbol of disorder, stilled by God's presence. The Gospels recall Christ calming the waters, a moment that carries far more than a simple miracle. It resonates with the same ancient memory that the struggle between chaos and order is not only cosmic, but deeply human, and that peace comes when the storm is subdued. For historians, this transmission reveals how ideas travel. A myth may be born in one city, in one culture, yet find its way into distant lands, translated, reimagined, and given new life. For the listener, it becomes a reminder that myths are not relics. They are living waters. They seep into new soil, take new shapes, and continue to nourish thought long after the original empire has vanished. Babylon may have fallen, its ziggurats crumbled, its language no longer spoken in marketplaces, yet its stories still breathe. Why do such stories endure? Perhaps because they speak to something universal. The struggle between chaos and order is not only about gods and monsters. It is about life itself, about the turbulence of rivers and the longing for calm, about the confusion of existence and the search for meaning. Every culture, in its own way, has asked the same question. How can life be steadied? What holds the world together? The Babylonians answered with Marduk and the ordering of the cosmos. The Canaanites with Baal, the Hebrews with their God, the Greeks with philosophy, and later traditions, too, have carried the same theme, reshaping it with each age. Even now, in modern times, the language of chaos and order continues to appear. Scientists describe the universe beginning in a burst of energy, expanding into form. Psychologists speak of the balance between stability and uncertainty in the human mind. The pattern persists, though the symbols change, and perhaps that is the deeper truth of myth. It is not only about the gods of long ago, but about the currents that still run within human thought. The Enuma Elish may be ancient, yet it continues to ripple because it touches something that has never left us. Humanity still seeks to understand beginnings, still seeks to find order in the storm, still seeks to believe that beneath all struggle there is a pattern that can hold. For the Babylonians, reciting the Enuma Elish each spring renewed the world. For us, remembering it tonight may not bring harvests or ensure rivers rise at the right time, but it can remind us of something equally vital, that we are part of a chain stretching back thousands of years. A chain of dreamers and storytellers, each turning to the waters of origin, each searching for the same calm dot. Think of it for a moment. The words you hear now are echoes of words spoken in temples of brick and red, where priests once chanted the names of Tiamat and Marduk. Those voices echoed in Canaanite shrines, in Hebrew songs, in Greek philosophy halls, in churches and monasteries, in books that crossed continents. And now they reach you in this quiet space, carried across millennia like ripples on a river that never stops flowing. Perhaps this is the greatest power of myth. Not that it tells us exactly what happened, but that it carries memory forward, stitching together human longing across time. The longing to know where we came from, the longing to believe that order can be found, the longing, too, for silence, for rest, for the calm that follows the storm. In this way, Babylon has not fallen at all. Its towers may be dust, its empire gone, but its story continues to live. To remember the Enuma Elish is to hear Babylon still speaking, not with stone, but with myth, not with armies, but with words. And so, as this reflection drifts to a close, the listener joins a vast company. To think of beginnings, to rest in the rhythm of myth, is to step into the same waters that carried countless others before. The chain remains unbroken, stretching from clay tablets to quiet thought tonight. The myth endures because the questions endure. What steadies the world? What holds the storm at bay? And what silence waits beyond all noise? The waters ripple still, the echoes continue, and the story, like the river, flows on without end. Chapter 24. The Meaning of Chaos, Creation's Hidden Companion in the Enuma Elish. The defeat of Tiamat marks the turning point of creation. Marduk rises as the champion of the gods, and order finally triumphs over the swirling waters of disorder. Yet the story does not end with her destruction. Tiamat does not vanish completely. Her body becomes the very fabric of the world. From her ribs and her belly, from the stretch of her skin and the depths of her waters, the earth and the heavens are formed. Chaos, once threatening to overwhelm all, is transformed into the very ground beneath life. This detail carries a profound truth. In Babylonian thought, chaos was not eliminated. It was reshaped. Disorder did not disappear. It became part of the structure of reality. The world, with all its rhythms, rests upon what was once wild and ungoverned. The mountains we climb, the rivers that carve valleys, the sky arching overhead, all are fashioned from the remnants of the primordial sea dragon. Chaos endures, not as a defeated enemy, but as creation's hidden companion. This vision differs from later ideas of absolute separation between good and evil, order and disorder. In Babylonian cosmology, the two are woven together. Marduk brings balance, but he does not erase what came before. Instead, he places it into service, allowing life to grow upon what was once destructive. Without Tiamat, there could be no world. Without her waters, no rivers. Without her body, no land to stand upon. Other traditions reflect the same wisdom in their own ways. In Greek thought, chaos was not a monster, but the raw void out of which everything emerged. In Hebrew scripture, the earth was first formless and void, with waters covering the deep, before God spoke light into being. Again and again, chaos appears at the beginning, not as an intruder, but as a necessary partner in the process of creation. What might this tell us about how the ancients saw life? Perhaps they understood that growth does not arise from stillness alone. New worlds emerge out of turbulence. The very conditions that unsettle us can be the same forces that lead to change. A storm tears through, but it clears the air. A river floods, but it enriches the soil. In this way, chaos is not only a threat, but a source of renewal. For the Babylonians, who lived along the Tigris and Euphrates, this understanding was not abstract. Each year, the rivers swelled with unpredictable floods. Sometimes they destroyed crops. At other times, they deposited fertile soil that allowed new harvests to flourish. The people knew that order and disorder were inseparable, that life depended on both. Their myths reflected this reality, showing that chaos was not simply an enemy to be feared, but a condition without which creation itself could not continue. Consider what it means that Tiamat's body, once terrifying, became the world's foundation. The enemy was not obliterated, but transformed. The sea dragon's fierce presence still lingers beneath the surface. In the depths of oceans, in the restlessness of the sky, in the unpredictability of storms. Even in daily life, the Babylonians would have felt this duality. Order was celebrated during rituals and festivals, but the shadow of disorder was always near. Crops might fail, cities might fall, but from these losses, new beginnings would arise. This perspective carries a quiet comfort. It suggests that confusion and restlessness are not signs of failure, but conditions from which something new can grow. When one feels unsettled, when the familiar order seems broken, perhaps that is not the end, but the shaping of a new beginning. The Babylonians, in their myth, offered a reminder: chaos is not final. It is the raw clay from which form will eventually emerge. There is a rhythm here, like waves lapping against a shore. The water surges forward, then recedes, never still, never entirely calm. Yet, it is in this constant motion that the coastline is shaped, smoothed, and renewed. Life, too, unfolds in such cycles. Times of order provide stability, while times of disorder push change. Both are necessary. Without calm, one cannot rest. Without disruption, one cannot grow. Even now, this ancient wisdom lingers. In modern science, chaos is not always seen as destruction, but as a force that produces new patterns. In ecology, disturbances like fire or flood create space for new species to thrive. In physics, chaos describes systems that, though unpredictable, give rise to order at higher levels. In psychology, periods of confusion often lead to deeper clarity. The Babylonians may not have spoken in these terms, but they grasped the essence. Out of chaos, order arises, again and again. And so, the myth of Tiamat becomes more than a tale of cosmic battle. It becomes a meditation on the nature of existence itself. Order and chaos are not separate realms, forever opposed. They are intertwined. One gives rise to the other. Marduk's victory was not the end of Tiamat, but her transformation. She continues to cradle life in her vast body, holding the world that emerged from her depths. Perhaps this is why the Enuma Elish was recited at the New Year festival. As the old year gave way to the new, chaos was close at hand. The cycle of seasons, the uncertainty of crops, the unpredictability of life, all reminded the Babylonians that stability is never absolute. But by retelling the story, they affirmed that order could emerge once more, that creation would continue, and that chaos itself was part of the promise of renewal. For us too, the lesson remains. Restlessness and disorder may feel overwhelming, but they carry within them the seeds of new beginnings. Chaos does not need to be feared. It can be seen as the dark soil in which the roots of change are planted. It can be felt as the necessary stirring that precedes calm. The myth whispers gently, "Do not despise the storm, for it clears the path for light. Do not fear confusion, for it can give shape to understanding." Chaos and calm flow together, as inseparable as tide and shore. And so, as the story of Tiamat reminds us, creation is never one-sided. It is not only the triumph of order, but the dance of both order and chaos, weaving the world together. Without one, the other cannot stand. The ground beneath us, the sky above, the waters that sustain us, all are reminders of this balance. To walk the earth is to walk upon the body of chaos transformed. To breathe beneath the heavens is to live within her vast embrace. She is gone, and yet she remains, silent and enduring, creation's hidden companion. Chapter 25. The eternal waters sleep as creation's mirror. In the Babylonian imagination, all things began in water. Before the sky, before the earth, before the first gods stirred, there was only Apsu, the fresh waters, and Tiamat, the salt sea. From their mingling came motion, and from motion, the birth of the cosmos. Water was not simply a background, it was the very substance of beginnings, the place where formlessness ripened into form. And though these myths were told thousands of years ago, their imagery touches something still familiar. For even now, each day ends not with permanence, but with a return. As the body grows heavy, as the mind loosens its grip on waking thought, one slips into a quiet resembling that first abyss. Sleep, in its silence, mirrors, creations, waters. It is the place where order dissolves, where boundaries soften, and where new visions can take shape. The Babylonians knew well the power of cycles. Day followed night, the moon waxed and waned, the rivers rose and fell, and human life mirrored this pattern. Waking and sleeping were not opposites, but two halves of the same rhythm. To rest was not to disappear, but to enter the waters again, to allow one's strength to return, so that a new day could be born. This rhythm was written into their myths. Apsu longed for silence, for still waters untouched by disturbance. Tiamat embodied the restless sea, forever stirring. Together they created the conditions for life. In sleep, both seem to stir within the human mind. There is the quiet of deep rest, where thought ceases, where one drifts into Apsu's still abyss. And there is the motion of dreams, where images rise, collide, and dissolve, like waves crashing against one another in Tiamat's sea. In this way, the myths of water are not distant. They live within the nightly return of the human mind. Too close one's eyes is to sink into a miniature cosmos, where the abyss waits to cradle thought and imagination. Sleep becomes not merely a pause, but a reenactment of creation itself. Anthropologists studying ancient Mesopotamia often emphasize how myths were not only recited but embodied. They were enacted in ritual, reflected in architecture, and lived through the patterns of daily existence. The temple was a cosmic mountain. The city was ordered like the heavens. And the New Year festival restaged Marduk's victory, renewing the world each spring. In the same way, sleep can be seen as a ritual enacted silently within each body. A private New Year, where chaos and order mingle, and life is renewed with each dawn. The Greeks, too, spoke of sleep as a descent into the waters of Lethe, the river of forgetfulness. Hindu traditions described creation as Vishnu dreaming upon the cosmic ocean, from whose visions the world unfolds. In the Hebrew Psalms, sleep is sometimes portrayed as a descent into Sheol, the shadowed realm from which God delivers the sleeper each morning with renewed breath. Again and again, cultures linked rest to waters, to the abyss, to the quiet before creation. Perhaps they saw in sleep what we often overlook, that rest is not only physical but cosmological. It is a return to beginnings. Each night carries the echo of the first night, when darkness stretched across the waters and creation waited to be spoken into being. Each morning is a new genesis, a reawakening from the silence of the deep. Yet there is another mystery here. Dreams rise from that silence like islands emerging from the sea. They are neither fully real nor entirely false. They carry fragments of memory, traces of desire, and shadows of fear reshaped into strange new forms. For the Babylonians, dreams were not merely accidents of sleep. They were messages, sometimes divine, sometimes deceptive, but always worth interpreting. Kings kept dream interpreters. Ordinary people offered prayers for guidance through the visions of the night to dream. Then was to brush against the divine, to wander in a world shaped by symbols, much like the gods themselves who arranged constellations in the sky and carved destinies on sacred tablets. The dreamer, like Marduk, found themselves in a landscape of shifting shapes, seeking order within chaos. And just as Tiamat's body became the structure of the cosmos, so the strange images of dreams could become the material for new understanding. What is striking is how universal this idea remains. Across cultures, dreams have been seen as doors. Sometimes they open to the ancestors, sometimes to the gods, sometimes to the hidden recesses of the self. But always, they emerge from the deep. In them, Apsu's silence and Tiamat's turbulence blend. One moment stillness, the next a restless storm of images. Sleep, then, is not a retreat, but a kind of journey. To rest is to allow oneself to dissolve into waters older than memory. To dream is to let those waters shape new worlds. And to awaken is to step back onto dry land, carrying with you traces of what was glimpsed beneath the surface. There is a comfort in viewing sleep this way. It shifts the experience from something passive to something cosmic. When one grows weary and lies down, it is not simply the body that seeks rest. It is the reenactment of the first movement of creation. Silence cradles thought. Chaos stirs imagination. From the mingling, a new day will rise. The Babylonians, with their temples rising from the river plains, must have seen this rhythm clearly. Each day, the sun rose from the horizon as though reborn from the waters. Each night, it sank back into the abyss. Humanity mirrored this same pattern, rising and sinking, waking and sleeping day after day. To them, this was not simply biology. It was cosmology written into flesh, and so sleep can be honored as more than necessity. It can be understood as a gentle act of creation, repeated endlessly, linking each person to the first waters. It is Apsu's gift of stillness, Tiamat's gift of restless imagination, joined together within the silence of night. Perhaps this is why sleep can feel so mysterious. To drift off is to surrender control, to let the ordered mind slip into something vaster. It is to trust that one will return, renewed. In this trust lies the same faith that the Babylonians placed in their myths, that order will rise again from chaos, that silence will not last forever, that life will continue its rhythm, and yet, the mystery never fully dissolves. Where do dreams truly come from? Why do they speak in riddles, in fragments of story and symbol? Are they only echoes of the self, or whispers from something beyond? The ancients leaned toward the latter. Perhaps, in their way, they were right. As the Enuma Elish taught, the waters are never gone. They are beneath all things, silent and restless, carrying the memory of creation. In sleep, one returns to them. In dreams, one listens to their echoes. And in waking, one rises again from their depths. So tonight, when the eyes grow heavy and the world begins to soften, consider the journey not as an ending, but as a return. The waters are waiting. The silence is near. To close one's eyes is to cradle creation itself, to dissolve into the abyss where all things begin, and to let new worlds form quietly in the depths of the mind. Chapter 26. Final Stillness, drifting with Apsu and Tiamat, at the close of the Babylonian creation story. When Marduk has triumphed and the world has been shaped into order, something lingers beneath the triumph. It is the waters. Apsu, the deep fresh waters, and Tiamat, the endless salt sea, do not vanish. They remain changed in form, but never destroyed. The mountains, the rivers, the earth itself, all of it rests upon their depth. Creation is built upon what came before, yet what came before continues to flow quietly, hidden beneath. The myth reminds us that beginnings are never left behind. The origin does not vanish once life appears. It endures as the ground of all being. Apsu's silence, Tiamat's turbulence, the mingling of calm and storm. These do not disappear when the gods arrange the skies or carve destinies on tablets. They remain present, like the deep current beneath a river's surface. Unseen yet sustaining dot to the Babylonians, this was not only myth, but truth woven into experience. Their lives unfolded along the great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, where fresh waters and salt tides sometimes mingled. The landscape itself echoed the story, fertile soil born of flood, order emerging from turbulence. They knew that the same waters that nourished crops could also rise in destructive floods. Life was never separated from chaos. It was balanced upon it. The Enuma Elish, in its final stillness, seems to whisper this truth. Creation was not the erasure of chaos, but its transformation. Marduk did not eliminate Tiamat. He reshaped her. Her body became the structure of the heavens and the earth. Her waters became the seas. Her breath became the winds. The same is true for Apsu. Though struck down early in the tale, his waters remained as the abyss below, the unseen reservoir from which new life could flow. This balance, order above, chaos beneath, is what allowed the world to endure. The myth suggests that stability is never final, but always held with intention. Perhaps the Babylonians saw in this a reflection of their own lives. Empires rise, but they rest upon shifting ground. Kings reign, but only for a time. Even the most carefully written destinies are shaped upon a background that cannot be fully controlled. In this way, Apsu and Tiamat are not villains or failures. They are companions of all creation. They embody what cannot be smoothed away, what lies beneath the surface of every ordered system. To remember them is to remember that silence and storm are part of the same whole. And for the listener tonight, this story takes on another meaning. The stillness of Apsu resembles the quiet into which one drifts as sleep arrives. The restlessness of Tiamat resembles the swirling dreams that follow. Together, they cradle the mind, dissolving the strict borders of waking life and allowing something new to take shape. To close one's eyes is to return to their waters, to float again upon the very depths from which all things were born. This was not only poetry for the ancients, it was theology and philosophy intertwined. To them, the gods arranged the cosmos, but the cosmos itself was never fixed in absolute terms. It breathed, shifted, renewed itself, much like the human cycle of waking and sleeping. In their rituals, they remembered this truth. Each new year, the Enuma Elish was recited, not as history, but as living reenactment. The act of chanting the creation story renewed the world, reaffirmed the balance, and allowed the people to rest within the security that order would once again prevail. But even then, chaos was not gone. It was acknowledged, honored in its transformed state. The myth carried a lesson. One does not conquer chaos by pretending it no longer exists. One lives with it, finds rhythm within it, and allows it to become part of the ground on which stability is built. This insight drifts quietly into our own reflections. How often does life feel as though it should reach a final state of balance, free of disruption? Yet the myth reminds that such freedom never truly exists. Beneath every moment of calm lies the potential for change. Beneath every ordered day flows the silent waters of unpredictability. To rest, then, is not to escape chaos, but to find stillness while floating upon it. The image of drifting becomes powerful here. Apsu, the abyss, does not demand effort. It is rest itself, the waters that hold without struggle. Tiamat, the restless sea, may stir waves, but even waves cradle. To drift with them is to let go of control, to trust that the waters beneath will not abandon you. The Babylonians, surrounded by rivers, would have known this experience intimately. To place oneself in a boat and let the current carry was to surrender, to accept that the waters determined the journey. The myth takes this image further. All of creation is a vessel, carried along by currents deeper than the gods themselves. And so the story closes where it began, in silence, in water, in the mingling of two great depths. Creation, with all its beauty and order, is but a ripple upon them. Empires may rise, myths may be spoken, and generations may pass, but beneath it all, Apsu and Tiamat remain. Perhaps this is the truest lullaby of the Enuma Elish, that after all the battles, after the victories and the crowning of kings, what endures is the same quiet that began it all. A silence that is not empty, but full. A stillness that is not absence, but foundation. As night gathers, the story invites one last reflection. To drift into rest is to join the waters again, to float with Apsu's calm and Tiamat's restless tide. Thoughts soften, dissolve, and return to the cradle of beginnings. In this stillness, nothing is demanded. Nothing must be held. All is carried, as the cosmos itself was once carried in the embrace of the primeval sea. So, let the final word of the myth not be triumph or conquest, but return. Return to silence. Return to waters. Return to the eternal ground that holds without end. For in that return lies peace, the same peace that has always waited beneath creation's surface, flowing still,